Fenris. The name alone carries weight, a world cursed by its own star, locked in an endless cycle of death and rebirth. Ice gives way to fire, fire drowns beneath ice. Continents shatter, seas boil, volcanoes scream, and glaciers consume the land once more. There is no peace, only the endless howl of the elements. This is the world that birthed the sons of Russ. Not by kindness, but by trial. Strength is the only coin Fenris accepts. The weak are offered to the depths, the unworthy to the cold, and the foolish to the beasts that stalk the night. From the moment a child draws breath, life is struggle. At birth, an infant is tested. A knife is placed in its tiny fist. If the child's grip falters, it is cast into the freezing sea to be claimed by the gods. Those who clutch the blade tightly, even in helpless infancy, are allowed to live. Such is the mercy of Fenris. The tribes wander the broken archipelagos, sailing their longships across the shifting seas. In the season of ice, they hunt kraken and sea dragons beneath the aurora-shrouded skies. In the time of fire, they flee as the oceans rise and molten rivers devour the land. They raid one another when the seas grow calm, their warriors eager to earn their place in song and saga. Honor is found in bloodshed. Every man must prove his worth in battle, for only deeds are remembered when the cold winds finally claim the flesh. The greatest among them carve their sagas into the bones of slain worms and raise toasts beneath the pale moon. From these brutal tribes, the Vilka Fenrika choose their own. When the longships of the All-Father descend from the stars, they do not take children. They take warriors. Those who have survived the blood feuds, the great hunts, the sea storms, and the endless hunger. These are the aspirants, chosen but not yet wolves. They are brought to Asaheim, the continent untouched by Fenris's violent seasons. High above the clouds, where even the volcanoes cannot reach, stands the Fang. Carved from the mountain's bones, its towers pierce the heavens like spears. Beneath its fortress lies a labyrinth of chambers, vaults, and ancient crypts where the bones of 10,000 heroes rest. The Fang is the beating heart of the rout. Here, the wolf priests and iron priests prepare the aspirants for their greatest trial. The test of Morkai. Stripped of weapons, armor, and food, they are cast into the Deathlands. For a season, they must survive the wilds of Asaheim, where ice worms burrow beneath the snow and the wind itself cuts flesh from bone. The dead are not mourned. Only the survivors return, gaunt and frostbitten, their eyes gleaming with a hunger that no longer belongs entirely to man. The first howl of the wolf echoes within them. But the test of Morkai is only the beginning. The Canis Helix awaits. The gene seed of Russ, distilled and preserved since the time of the Great Crusade, is introduced into their veins. The body convulses, reshaping itself under the Helix's power. Bones grow denser, muscles stronger, senses sharper. Eyes burn golden, canines lengthen into fangs, and the instincts of the predator awaken. Some fall to the curse. The beast inside devours their mind, leaving only rage and fury. These poor souls become wolfen, lost to the wild. But those who master the Helix emerge reborn. No longer tribesmen, no longer mere men. They are space wolves. They take their place within the pack. Blood Claws, the youngest, burn with reckless fury. Grey Hunters, tempered by countless battles, stand as the backbone of the chapter. Long Fangs, the elder warriors, guide their brothers with wisdom earned through centuries of war. Each company stands as a pack, bound not by rank, but by brotherhood. They fight as the wolf hunts, not as soldiers in rigid lines, but as a living tide of fang and claw, each warrior moving in harmony with his brothers, each anticipating the other's strike, each howling in the same rhythm of slaughter. When battle is done, they gather in the great halls of the Fang, beneath the flickering light of fire pits. Here the rune priests chant the old sagas, voices rising like the northern wind. The wolf priests pour omjod into horned cups. The warriors boast of their kills, of oaths sworn and debts paid. Laughter echoes against stone carved with the names of the fallen. For each battle is a saga, and each saga weaves into the great tapestry of the chapter. They do not pray as others do. The Emperor is not some distant god to be worshipped with hollow words. He is the All-Father, the Lord of mankind, and they are his wolves, forged to be his executioners. Oaths to the All-Father are sworn with blood and steel, not with incense and sermons. Outsiders call them savage, unruly, undisciplined. Let them. The wolves do not bend to the dictates of Terra's scribes, nor do they follow the cold logic of the Codex Astartes. Their loyalty is to Russ, to the Pack, to the All-Father. That is enough. For while others debate protocols and hierarchies, the wolves hunt. In the frozen dark of Fenris, where no light warms the soul, the wolves endure. When all others break beneath the weight of duty, the Vilka Fenrika still rise. For they were born in a world where survival is earned every hour, where every heartbeat is a victory. That strength carries them into the stars. This is Fenris, world of ice and fire, mother of monsters, cradle of heroes. The wolves endure. Before the sagas of Russ, before the howls of Fenris shook the stars, there was the 6th Legion. Born in the dark of old Terra, bred for war long before Fenris knew the tread of the Sky Warriors, the proto-Space Wolves were raised not as noble knights, but as executioners. In the Emperor's earliest conquests, as the Thunder Warriors fell and the first Space Marines were forged, the 6th Legion stood apart. They were not chosen from noble houses, nor scholars, nor the vaunted gene-clades of Terra's highborn. Theirs was blood drawn from the tribes of Albia, the war clans of the American steppes, and the techno-barbarian remnants who had survived Terra's endless wars. Brutal, cunning, survivors. These early wolves bore no names of honor. They were simply the 6th. The Emperor kept them distant from the pageantry of his fledgling Imperium. While the Luna Wolves marched at the forefront of his grand armies, the 6th was used sparingly, unleashed only where annihilation was required. They were not conquerors. They were colors. Where worlds resisted compliance with the Emperor's vision, where rebellion simmered and heresy dared to whisper, the 6th arrived like a storm of death. Their arrival was rarely announced. Their victories were seldom celebrated. When the 6th left a world, little remained but ash and silence. Their armor bore no howling wolf at that time. Their banners carried no Fenrisian runes, only the red of sanctioned blood and the pale gray that would one day become their mark. Some whispered in fear, even then, that the 6th were different, genetically unstable, prone to savagery. The canis helix, though still unspoken, already stirred in their veins. In battle, they displayed terrifying instincts, hunting their prey not with rank and file discipline, but with the grace of predators. Packs formed naturally in the field, warriors moving as one without orders, their blood singing for the kill. It was during these early campaigns that the first whispers of their darker nature emerged. After the bloodletting at Delsvan, where the 6th exterminated an entire planetary rebellion with no quarter, the Emperor's custodians reported unease at the unrestrained slaughter. Civilians had not been spared. Imperial army detachments were executed alongside rebels for perceived cowardice. The Emperor took note. Disciplinarians were assigned. The Legion was kept in the shadows. They were not paraded in triumph like their brethren. They were reserved as a final sanction. Thus they earned their first secret name, the Emperor's Executioners. But the 6th did not break. They embraced their role. To them there was no shame in delivering judgment. The Emperor had forged them to be a weapon unswayed by sentiment, unclouded by mercy. It was in this era that the Sixth first began to define their own brutal culture. Though Fenris was yet unknown to them, already they spoke in terms of the hunt. Leaders were called pack lords. Units operated as kill packs, striking not in lines but as encircling hunters. They learned to sniff out weakness, to bait their enemies into rashness, to strike where the prey was blind. Their instincts made them invaluable as the Great Crusade expanded beyond Terra's solar dominion. When the Crusade reached the outlying rebel human empires, it was often the Sixth that was deployed to crush resistance too stubborn or too heretical for diplomacy. On the irradiated plains of Zephaniah, they broke the Brotherhood of the Worm in 3 nights of ceaseless urban hunting. On the fungal hive worlds of Kuranos, they purged the techno-mutants who worshipped Xenos gods in blood-drenched feasts. They left none alive. The Sixth Legion's greatest advantage was not merely their savagery, it was their absolute loyalty. While others questioned, while rival legions quarreled for glory, the Sixth obeyed. The Emperor's word was their law, his justice was their purpose. Yet there was unease in the ranks of the Imperium. The Administratum feared them, the Remembrancers avoided them. Even the Mechanicum spoke in hushed tones of their biological peculiarities. Rumors spread that the Sixth carried a genetic instability, a flaw that drove some of their number into bestial rages. Though such incidents were rare, the implications were unsettling. But still, the Emperor kept them at his side, for he knew that in the darkness beyond compliance and diplomacy, there would always be need for an executioner. The Sixth Legion marched under many banners during the early Crusade, with the Luna Wolves at the Ulanor campaign, with the Iron Warriors during the pacification of the Iron Moons of Kalok, even with the Word-bearers in the early purges of the Serrated Suns cults, a bitter irony in hindsight. Yet always their methods set them apart. While the Word-bearers chanted sermons, the Sixth burned libraries. While the Ultramarines built civic order, the Sixth toppled heretic altars. While the Salamanders offered redemption, the Sixth offered only the blade. Their role was necessary, if uncomfortable. The Imperium called it compliance. The Sixth called it the hunt. Still, something was missing. They were warriors without a king. The other legions marched behind their Primarchs. The Luna Wolves had Horus. The Ultramarines had Guilliman. The World Eaters had Angron. The Thousand Suns, Magnus. But the Sixth fought on, rudderless, their Primarch lost somewhere in the void, until, at last, the Emperor found him. When the Wolf King of Fenris was discovered, the Sixth Legion rejoiced, for they recognized in Leman Russ a soul kindred to their own. He was no distant philosopher, no gilded statesman. He was a predator, a hunter, a warlord born to lead the pack. Under Russ, the Sixth shed its number and its silence. They became the Vulca Fenrica, the Space Wolves. Yet the reputation forged in those early years was never forgotten. To the Imperium at large, they remained the executioners. They became the Emperor's blade, drawn when others failed. When the word-bearers grew too zealous, it was whispered that the wolves stood ready. When dark pacts were suspected within the unknown lost legions, some said the Sixth had already done what had to be done. None speak openly of such things, but the truth lives in the shadows. Not even their brother legions were safe from the wolves' wrath. The night the wolf stood before Angron on Genna, the fury unleashed upon Prospero, the countless acts done in secret under orders that none but the Emperor and Russ truly understood. The Vulca Fenrica carried a burden few others could comprehend. They were not simply warriors, they were the hand of judgment. When compliance failed, when corruption festered, when loyalty faltered, it was the wolves who closed their jaws. The Emperor did not love them for their beauty. He loved them for their necessity, and so they embraced the name given to them in whispers. We are the Emperor's executioners. The stars themselves bore witness as the 6th Legion shed its number and its silence. The hunt was no longer aimless. Their king had come. Leman Russ, the Wolf King, the Lord of Winter and War. When he was found upon the savage world of Fenris, it was not the Emperor who tamed him, but a meeting of equals, 2 predators circling each other, recognizing kinship beneath their differences. Where others had knelt, Russ stood. Where others offered worship, Russ offered loyalty. And the Emperor, who needed not blind devotion but capable warlords, accepted. With Russ at their head, the 6th Legion was reforged. No longer the shadowed killers of Terra's darkest conquests, they became something more. A brotherhood of warriors, each bound to the pack, their savagery tempered by the instinctive discipline of the hunt. They took the name given to them by their father, the Vilka Fenrika, the Space Wolves. The Great Crusade, already decades into its relentless expansion, became their stage. Under Russ, they hunted the enemies of mankind across the galaxy's breadth, not as conquerors hungry for compliance, but as predators purging weakness, corruption, and treachery wherever they found it. Unlike many of their brother legions, the Wolves cared little for grand speeches or political theater. They let their deeds write their sagas, and the galaxy soon learned to fear the gray-armored warriors whose howls announced death. On the storm-racked world of Genna 9, mutant warlords had raised a heretical empire, twisting men into monstrous hybrids beneath bloated false gods. The wolves struck from the night skies like meteors. Drop pods rained fire, and the wolves disembarked with axes singing and bolters roaring. The mutants barely understood their doom before it was upon them. The chieftains were dragged screaming from their temples, their blasphemies silenced by frost-coated blades. Where others would have sieged the cities, the Space Wolves turned them into hunting grounds. They stalked their prey through collapsed hab blocks and cratered avenues, dragging cult leaders into the open, executing them before their followers to break their spirits. Within a fortnight, the warlords' banners burned atop their own pyres. The saga of Genna was sung for years within the halls of the Fang. Yet it was but one hunt among many. When the Vervon Marcher Lords defied Imperial compliance, erecting vast fortress cities across their volcanic world, it was the Vilka Fenrika who answered. Where siegecraft might have taken years, the wolves descended upon the supply lines, cutting off food and fuel, starving the cities into panic. Then, in the time of fire, as magma rivers consumed the outer walls, the wolves led the assault, leaping across ruined battlements under a rain of ash, cutting through desperate defenders like winter wolves amongst starving elk. Their ruthlessness was legendary, but it was never mindless. Russ taught his sons to strike with purpose. Mercy was given to the innocent, but to the proud, the defiant, and the heretic, there was no quarter. The Space Wolves earned many names during this era: executioners, butchers, kingslayers. To those who fell beneath their blades, they were monsters, but to the Imperium, they were its sharpest fang. Yet even among their brothers, the wolves stood apart. The Great Crusade was as much a clash of cultures as it was a war for unity. Each legion carried the mark of its father. The Ultramarines built their domains with structure and law. The Word-bearers carried their scriptures. The Lunar Wolves spread order beneath the banner of their beloved Horus. The Space Wolves, however, sought neither dominion nor temples. They demanded no tribute from those who submitted. Their prize was the hunt itself, the satisfaction of knowing they had done the Emperor's will, and the songs they would carry home. This independence brought friction with others. On Du Lane, the rivalry between Russ and Lion L. Johnson was born. The tyrant Durath of Dulan had defied Imperial compliance, his war fleet threatening nearby systems. The Space Wolves were dispatched alongside the Dark Angels to end his rule. Both legions sought glory, but their methods differed. While Russ prepared his companies for a full assault, the Lions struck preemptively, slaying Durath before the Wolves could close in. The Dark Angels achieved swift victory, but at the cost of Russ's honor. The Lion had robbed the hunt of its rightful conclusion. When the battle was over, Russ demanded satisfaction. On the plains beneath Dulan's shattered fortresses, the two Primarchs dueled for a full day and night. Blades clashed, fists struck like thunder, and their warriors formed a silent ring around them, unwilling to interfere. At last, both exhausted and bloodied, Russ began to laugh, a deep, echoing howl of amusement at the pointlessness of their pride. The Lion, enraged by what he mistook for mockery, struck Russ unconscious with a final blow. So began the feud that would echo through the millennia. Yet beneath it was respect, for both Primarchs recognized the other's strength. The ritual duels between the Space Wolves and Dark Angels that continue to this day are echoes of that first contest, a rivalry honored even in enmity. Further campaigns only deepened the Wolves' legend. On Morven Fife, an insurrectionist planetary governor declared himself a god-king, backed by rogue psychers and warp-touched beasts. The Space Wolves descended without warning, driving deep into the traitor's palace at nightfall. By dawn, the governor's severed head was mounted upon the gates, his sorcerers burned at the pyres. Where psychers twisted the warp into unnatural weapons, the rune priests of Fenris answered. They did not wield the warp as fragile scholars, but as shamans invoking the will of Fenris itself. Stormcaller rune priests brought down lightning upon demon hosts, while others summoned biting blizzards to blind enemy gun lines. Their mastery of the warp was different, primal, instinctive, and far older than the sterile laws of Terra. Even after the Council of Nicaea forbade psychic use, the rune priests continued their craft, protected by the wisdom of Russ, who argued their powers were not sorcery, but gifts rooted in Fenris's primal bond with the warp. Such defiance, while dangerous, was tolerated, for the Wolves' loyalty was beyond question. Their victories piled higher. The siege of the Hryn cluster, where they bled the massive heretic war fleets with relentless hit-and-fade assaults until the enemy starved. The burning of the Harnack enclaves, where a Xenos parasite cult was exterminated root and stem. The culling of Nekkar, where 3 entire rebel systems were brought to heel in less than a year beneath the Wolves' coordinated onslaught. The Great Crusade was a sea of blood, and in it, the Wolves swam like sharks. The Brotherhood of the Rout grew ever stronger. Each victory added names to the sagas sung in the Fang. Warriors who rose from blood claws to grey hunters, from grey hunters to wolf guard, each earning their place not through rank, but through the deeds etched into their personal sagas. And Leman Russ led them always from the front, his laughter booming across the battlefield, his frost blade Mjolnir drinking deep of traitor blood. The Great Crusade saw the Imperium expanded beyond any vision once dreamed on Terra. Yet in its shadows, the threads of darker fates began to coil. Tensions brewed, brothers whispered in secret councils, pride festered. The wolves hunted still, but storm clouds gathered, for soon they would not only hunt the enemies of the Emperor, they would be called to turn their fangs upon one of their own. The burning of Prospero awaited. The Great Crusade marched ever onward, and with every conquered world the Imperium grew. But beneath the banners of victory, a storm was gathering, a storm of pride, of betrayal, and of fate. And when it broke first in the bitter flame of Prospero. 2 legions, 2 Primarchs, two destinies locked in conflict long before blade touched armor. Magnus the Red, master of the Thousand Suns, stood as one of the Emperor's most brilliant sons, a sorcerer of unrivaled power, a scholar of forbidden truths. His warriors were not just space marines, but mystics, wielders of psychic might refined to perfection. Where the wolves of Russ hunted with fang and steel, the Thousand Suns wielded knowledge as their weapon. To the Space Wolves, this was perilous, dangerous, abominable. The wolves had long distrusted the warp's temptations. They knew its lure was subtle, its corruption patient. The rune priests of Fenris may have drawn upon its energies, but theirs was a guarded path, shamanistic, rooted in ancient Fenrisian rites, never aspiring to control the warp, only to survive its touch. The Thousand Suns, by contrast, reached deep into its heart, arrogantly believing they could master that which could never be tamed. Tension simmered between the legions, but it was not until the Council of Nicaea that it boiled to the surface. The Emperor himself summoned his sons to determine the fate of psychers within the legions. The halls of Nicaea rang with debate. The custodians, the Sisters of Silence, the ecclesiarchy, all offered their counsel. Magnus argued passionately for the use of psychic might as a gift to humanity's future, but others spoke against him, and among them stood the voice of Leman Russ. To Russ, the matter was simple. Power without caution is corruption. The warp is no tool, it is a predator, and those who believe themselves its masters are but prey who have not yet been devoured. The Allfather listened and at last decreed the practice of psychic sorcery forbidden. The rune priests would remain only under strict interpretation, for they drew upon traditions older than any librarius. But for the Thousand Suns, the decree struck at the very core of their existence. Magnus did not cease his studies. Defiant, he pursued forbidden knowledge in secret. He believed that only by mastering the warp could humanity be protected from it. But in his hubris, Magnus saw too far and reached too deep. When Horus, war master of the Imperium, turned to treachery, Magnus sought to warn the Emperor. But rather than trusting ships or messengers, he employed the warp itself, hurling his consciousness across the stars directly into the Imperial palace. In doing so, he shattered wards the Emperor had carefully woven to seal his secret webway project. The wards cracked, demons flooded the Imperial palace's hidden sanctums, and the Emperor's work was ruined. Magnus's pride had wounded his father, and the punishment would fall to Russ. The Emperor summoned the Wolf King. The order was given: bring Magnus to Terra to face judgment. And yet, as so often in that age, treachery twisted fate's course. Horus, already corrupted by chaos, poisoned Russ's orders. Whispered lies reached the Wolf King's ears. Magnus was to be destroyed, not captured. For the Emperor's executioners, there was no hesitation. The rout was unleashed. The fleet of the Vilca Fenrica tore through the void, accompanied by the Emperor's own custodians and the silent Sisters of Silence. In grim silence, they made for Prospero, the Thousand Suns' homeworld, a planet of shining towers, golden libraries, and crystalline spires that reflected the light of its red sun. Russ offered Magnus one chance: surrender, submit to the Allfather's justice. But the reply was silence. The assault began. Drop pods fell like iron rain, the storm clouds split by thunder and fire. The gray-armored warriors landed across the glittering cities, bolters roaring, frost axes cleaving through defenders. The Thousand Suns resisted with all their psychic might, unleashing storms of sorcerous flame, warp fire coiling like serpents across the battlefield. Where bolter rounds found their mark, they burst not in blood, but in howling warp energies as psychic shields faltered. The wolves advanced like a tide, undeterred. They hunted in packs, darting through the towering structures, dragging Prosperine warriors from behind their defenses. They tore through cults of warp craft, silenced war covens with blade and bolter. The Sisters of Silence waded through the sorceress onslaught like wraiths, their null auras turning psychic fire to ash. Thousand Sons who faced them found their powers fail, their minds buckling under the dead weight of the null field. Side by side with the custodians, they carved a brutal path through Magnus's elite. The battle raged for days, turning the once pristine city of Tizca into a charnel house. Tower after tower collapsed, pyres of burning texts and ancient artifacts illuminating the night skies. At the heart of the conflict, the inevitable confrontation came. Leman Russ and Magnus the Red met upon the ruined steps of the Great Pyramid of Photep, two sons of the Emperor, two visions of humanity's fate. Words were few. Each saw only betrayal in the other. Russ accused Magnus of arrogance, of defying the Emperor's will. Magnus decried Russ as blind, a savage unleashed to punish what he could not understand. Then words gave way to violence. Magnus, his flesh burning with the raw power of the warp, struck with fists that could shatter ceramite. Russ, the apex predator, matched him with blade and fang. The ground trembled beneath their blows, lightning crackled, frost and flame warred in the sky. For long hours they clashed. Magnus's sorcery unleashed howling cyclones. Russ countered with raw, feral strength, each blow of his axe carving through wards and defenses. Where the Crimson King sought mastery through knowledge, the Wolf King fought with primal fury, a living embodiment of Fenris's untamed wilderness. At last, Russ seized Magnus by the throat. With a roar that echoed across the burning city, he lifted his brother and in one motion broke him across his knee. Magnus screamed, his back broken, his spirit sundered. In that moment, the demon whispered. The powers of the warp opened their arms, and with one last act of defiance, Magnus vanished into the immaterium, slipping through reality itself to escape final judgment. The battle did not end with Magnus's departure. The wolves hunted down the remnants of the Thousand Sons, their pyramids reduced to rubble, their libraries put to the torch, the air thick with ash and ruin. Yet not all were slain. A great portion of the Thousand Sons fled into the warp alongside their broken Primarch. Their legion would not perish, but it would return as something far darker. In the aftermath, the wolves stood victorious amidst the wreckage of Prospero, but theirs was no triumph sung with pride. The warriors of the rout, hardened though they were, could not help but feel the bitter taste of brothers' blood spilled. Even the Fang, far across the void, fell silent when word of Prospero's fate reached it. The burning of Prospero had ended, but in truth it was only the beginning, for soon the heresy would engulf them all. Prospero burned behind them. The howls of victory faded beneath the crackling of ruined spires and the hissing of cooling plasma. Yet even as the ash settled, fate tightened its noose around the wolves. The rout did not linger. Their work was done. The Crimson King had been broken, the Thousand Sons scattered to the warp. The Space Wolves gathered their dead, tended their wounded, and returned to their ships. But the warp had other designs. As the Space Wolves' fleet withdrew from Prospero, they entered the Alaxis Nebula, a vast sea of light and dust where stars were born and navigators feared to tread. It was here that the trap was sprung. Without warning, the warp shifted, the currents of reality twisting like a wounded serpent. From the shadows came the Alpha Legion. Alpharius, the Hydra, master of deception, had been waiting. Alpha Legion ships emerged in perfect formation, their engines burning pale and cold. Lances struck from ambush points, cutting into the wolves' formations. Boarding pods launched from hidden void cloaks, their saboteurs infiltrating Space Wolf vessels, even as the first shots were fired. The wolves were caught in a web of lies and ambush. The nebula choked communications. Visibility shrank to claw's width. In the swirling gas clouds, friend and foe danced in and out of sensor range. The wolves fought blind, their packs split across the stars. But the Vilka Fenrika do not panic. They are hunters, and hunters adapt. Wolf lords barked orders across narrow vox links, regrouping into fighting clusters. Pack instinct took hold as ships maneuvered like predators in the mists, counter-ambushing Alpha Legion flanks. When boarding parties breached, they were met with axes and claws, the narrow corridors of the wolves' ships turning into blood-soaked killing grounds. The Alpha Legion, however, had not come merely to defeat the wolves. They sought to delay them. For while the rout bled in Alaxis, Horus made his move. The War Master's rebellion was already in motion. Istvan had burned, legions had fallen to treachery, the Horus heresy had begun. Russ did not yet know the full scope of the betrayal. He knew only that his fleet was cut off, harried by unseen hands, and that shadows whispered of disloyalty among the legions. Every delay was a knife at the Emperor's throat. The wolves fought with growing desperation, carving a bloody path through the Alpha Legion's trap. But for every Hydra head they severed, two more seemed to rise. The Alpha Legion's sabotage and misinformation sowed confusion. They used vox mimicry to imitate loyalist distress calls, luring isolated wolf ships into ambushes. They corrupted astropathic signals, ensuring Russ's pleas for aid never reached Terra. The rout was isolated, yet they endured. Through sheer attrition and relentless aggression, the wolves slowly broke the Alpha Legion's grip. Boarding torpedoes were repelled with feral tenacity. Destroyers were reduced to drifting hulks under concentrated lance fire. The Fang-class strike cruisers, named for ancient wolves of Fenrisian legend, carved through ambush lines like enraged predators. In the end, it was not cunning, but brute force that opened the way. Russ himself led the final push. Aboard his flagship, Hrafnkill, the Wolf King stood at the prow as torpedoes cleared the path, his voice carried on every ship's vox. No more traps, no more shadows. We cut our way home. With a final coordinated charge, the Space Wolves broke through the Hydra's noose, leaving Alpha Legion wreckage adrift in their wake. The price had been high, ships lost, brothers slain, the fleet bloodied. But the wolves had escaped. Their relief was short-lived, for now true horror revealed itself. Word reached them of Istvan Fi, the betrayal of Fulgrim, Angron, Mortarion, and Kurz. The massacre of the loyal legions. Horus, the War Master, had turned. The sons of Horus marched against Terra itself. Russ's face darkened. The scope of the treachery was beyond even his grim expectations. His howls of fury shook the deck of the Hrafnkill as his warriors gathered. The Emperor had been betrayed by his own sons, and the galaxy was aflame. The wolves had been isolated by design. They had been drawn away from the early battles of the heresy, denied the chance to strike at the traitors before their strength consolidated. The trap at Alaxis was not simply a military gambit. It had been orchestrated to keep the Emperor's executioners out of play, and now the road home was long and perilous. Russ set his course for Terra. Every ship, every able warrior, every ounce of their remaining strength was bent toward the defense of the All-Father. But as the fleet advanced, more dangers emerged. Not all traitors hid in the warp. Reports reached Russ of strange warp movements near the Trisolian Rift. Rumors spoke of Horus himself, leading a vanguard fleet, raiding Imperial holdings, destroying loyalist strongholds en route to Terra. Russ made a choice. He would not allow the War Master free rein. He would hunt Horus, even if it meant risking his own fleet once more. In the black void near Trisolian, the wolves found their prey. The sons of Horus waited. A brutal void battle erupted as the two legions collided. Boarding torpedoes struck like harpoons. The wolves launched themselves into the sons of Horus's ships, determined to tear the traitors apart from within. Brother fought brother, chain axes shrieking, bolters roaring, war howls echoing in the steel corridors. It was not a war of honor, but a war of vengeance. The rout unleashed their fury upon those who had spat upon the Emperor's name. And amidst the carnage, Russ found Horus. The two Primarchs met blade to blade in the flickering light of a burning warship. No longer brothers in arms, now predator and prey. Russ fought with the wrath of Fenris, his frost blade singing, his strength unmatched. Horus answered with cold precision, his demon-tinged weapon slashing with impossible speed. Their duel was thunder and lightning, claw and hammer. Russ landed blows that could shatter mountains, driving Horus back with sheer ferocity. But Horus had become something more than mortal, a creature of corruption, empowered by the ruinous powers. His blade bit through Russ's armor, his counterstrikes carving deep into the Wolf King's flesh. The battle raged until blood soaked the deck beneath their feet. Though Russ wounded Horus, though his blade pierced the War Master's defenses, it was not enough. Horus, fueled by unnatural strength, struck Russ down, driving him into unconsciousness. The wolves surged forward to defend their fallen lord, their wrath driving the sons of Horus into retreat. But the damage was done. Russ lay broken, his fleet scattered, his chance to end the heresy lost. By providence, or perhaps fate, the Raven Guard arrived. Korax's warriors reinforced the battered wolves, forcing Horus to withdraw. The trap at Trisolian had failed to kill Russ, but it had bought Horus time. Terra stood alone. Russ recovered aboard the Hrafnkel, his body shattered but his will unbroken. He cursed himself for failing to slay Horus when the moment was within reach. He would not arrive at Terra in time. The siege of Terra began without the rout. When the news came that Horus was dead, slain by the Emperor's hand, and that the Master of Mankind was entombed upon the Golden Throne, Russ fell into a brooding silence. He had been the executioner, but in the end the final execution had fallen to another. The wolves had been delayed, deceived, and scattered, but they had not been broken. And now, as the heresy burned itself out, Russ vowed that their vengeance was not yet complete. The rout would hunt again. The fires of the heresy still smoldered as the rout gathered once more beneath the banners of Fenris. Horus lay dead. The Emperor sat silent upon the Golden Throne. Terra bled, but endured. Yet the war was not over. For while the traitor legions had been broken at the siege of Terra, they had not been destroyed. They scattered into the stars like wounded beasts, retreating into the maelstrom of the Eye of Terror. The Imperium stood bloodied and staggering, but the Space Wolves stood ready, their fangs still sharp, their fury unspent. The scouring had begun. The wolves of Russ were not made for politics or reconstruction. They were not builders or governors. They were hunters. And as the traitors fled, it was the Space Wolves who pursued them into the dying light of the broken Imperium. The Iron Warriors had retreated to their iron fortresses deep within the warp storms. The Word-bearers fled into the dark temples of the Eye. The Night Lords scattered into piracy and terror. The sons of Horus, leaderless, fractured into war bands. But no matter how far they fled, the rout followed. Russ led his sons with a single purpose: vengeance. On the shadow world of Yarant, the rout cornered remnants of the Word-bearers, led by dark apostles who still carried the foul mantras of Lorgar. The wolves fell upon them like winter's wrath. Long fangs reduced their shrines to molten glass, while gray hunters dragged cultists from their hiding places, severing their tongues before the slaughter. The rune priests called down blizzards that choked the skies, freezing the fleeing heretics in place before the final axe blow fell. At the siege of Bot, they confronted the World Eaters. Here, the butcher's nails sang as Kharn's warband charged in frothing madness. The wolves met them with feral precision, matching rage with controlled fury. Shield walls held, bolter fire cut swathes through the berserkers, and Wolfguard champions dueled chainaxe to frostaxe in savage duels that echoed across the burning plains. On the corpse world of Garmin's Reach, a warband of Alpha Legion operatives sought to corrupt an entire sector into rebellion. They played their games of misdirection and sabotage, spreading false banners and using proxy armies to bleed the loyalist forces. But against the wolves, deception was a failing strategy. The Vulca Fenrica hunted the puppet masters directly. They tracked the Alpha Legion cells like wolves track prey, sensing the faintest signs of falsehood, cutting away the lies to expose the throat beneath. When the Hydra heads finally lay severed, the rebellion collapsed into ruin. For Russ, there was no rest. Each victory was a step, each purge a necessity. Yet with every battle, something within the Wolf King grew distant. His brothers were gone or scattered. Horus dead, Sanguinius slain. Leman withdrew to rebuild. Vulcan had vanished. Ferrus Manus was no more. The lion was missing. Dawn retreated to Terra, and even Rogel's strength grew cold under the weight of loss. The Wolf King, once so vibrant, so fierce with the hunger of the hunt, began to speak less of victory and more of what lay ahead. The burden of duty grew heavier. The sagas sung in the halls of the Fang grew more somber. And still the hunt continued. The final great campaign came at the edge of the Eye itself. The sons of Horus, once the War Master's proud legion, had been reduced to infighting and ruin. But a warband calling itself the Sons of the Eye had gathered strength at Milium, seeking to raise Horus's shattered legion once more beneath the banner of Abaddon, the self-proclaimed War Master of Chaos. Russ would not allow it. The wolves descended upon Milium with a fury unmatched even by their prior hunts. They fought not for honor nor vengeance, but to prevent a greater evil from rising. In the twisted gravity wells of the Eye's edge, Space Wolf battle barges unleashed their fury, reducing corrupted fortresses to floating debris. The wolves boarded demon-infested vessels, cleaving their way through cultists and traitor Astartes alike. The howls of the rout pierced even the warp's unnatural silence. Where demons bled warp fire, the rune priests banished them with the ancient rites of Fenris. In the heart of the battle, the Wolf King himself carved a path directly to the traitor warlords, breaking their strength with his own hands. Abaddon escaped that day, but the gathering of the sons of Horus was shattered. Their bid to rise again was broken, for a time. The scouring dragged on, but Russ sensed the tides shifting. No matter how many traitors they slew, new warbands crawled forth from the Eye like maggots from a corpse. The nature of the war had changed. The Imperium was rebuilding itself into something different. A fortress, not a crusade. Bureaucracy, not brotherhood. Russ saw that his place in this new Imperium was fading. In the feasting halls of the Fang, his wolf lords saw the change in him. No longer did he laugh so easily beneath the banners of their victories. His thoughts wandered beyond the void, to futures yet unwritten, to threats yet unseen. Then, one night beneath the twin moons of Asaheim, Russ called his inner circle to the highest chamber of the Fang. There were no servants, no scribes, no petitioners. Only his most trusted wolf lords and rune priests stood in attendance. He spoke of portents, of visions received from the All-Father, of great darkness yet to come, a final battle in which he would be needed, far from the halls of Fenris, far from the Imperium itself. He spoke of the wolf time, the time when chaos would rise in full, when the enemies of mankind would unite, and the Emperor's light would flicker like a dying star. And when that time came, he vowed the Wolf King would return for the final hunt. His wolf lords argued. They demanded to fight at his side, to follow him wherever the path led. But Russ refused. This journey, he said, was one he must take alone. And so, under the light of Fenris's cold moons, Leman Russ departed. He left behind his axe, Mjolnir. He left behind his armor, his throne, and his titles. With only a few of his most trusted companions, the mysterious Wolfblade, he vanished into the stars. No one saw him leave. No ship was recorded. No course was charted. He simply disappeared. The rout mourned, but they did not break. For Russ left them with purpose, to watch, to guard, to endure. The time of the wolf time would come, but until then, the Vulca Fenrica would hold fast, guarding the Imperium as only they could. In the centuries that followed, the wolves awaited their father's return. His saga remained unfinished. His place at the great feasting table of the Fong sits empty, his drinking horn untouched, his name spoken with both reverence and longing. Even now, as the Imperium faces horrors undreamed of, the wolves of Fenris watch the stars, listening for the howl that will signal the Wolf King's return. For Russ is not dead, he hunts. The Wolf King was gone, but the howls of Fenris did not fall silent. With Russ vanished into the void, the Vulca Fenrica stood at a crossroads. Their king had left no successor, no clear warlord to take his place. But the rout was never a legion of rigid chains of command. It was a pack, a brotherhood, and a pack without its alpha does not dissolve. It watches, waits, and endures. Thus began the time of the watchful guardians. The wolf lords, seasoned hunters who had fought under Russ himself, gathered at the stone table within the Fang. There they pledged a solemn oath. They would not squabble for supremacy. They would not fracture as other legions had. Each great company would rule its own fate, led by its wolf lord, but all would serve the pack, the chapter, as one. The Space Wolves would endure, waiting for the return of the Wolf King, while defending the Imperium in his absence. In the cold centuries that followed, the rout became both sword and shield for the Imperium. They were no longer simply executioners nor vengeful hunters. They became guardians of the northern stars, wardens of the Imperium's wild frontiers. From the Eye of Terror to the Ghoul Stars, from the eastern fringe to the Halo worlds, the wolves roamed the galaxy, ever watchful, ever ready. Many threats tested them. The War of the False Primarch erupted, a convulsive conflict in the centuries following the heresy, when a pretender claiming to be a lost son of the Emperor rallied many chapters to rebellion. The Imperium splintered under the weight of doubt, with brothers turning blades upon each other once more. The rout did not waver. The wolves refused to be drawn into the politicking of Terra's high lords. They stood apart, watching. When the fighting escalated into open war, the wolves struck decisively, not to take sides, but to cull those who had fallen into treachery. They hunted down warbands of corrupted loyalists and treacherous opportunists alike, purging the fringes of the conflict without becoming embroiled in the madness at its center. They remained the Emperor's executioners, but now they chose their hunts with wisdom. As the centuries passed, other threats rose from beyond the stars. The orcs, ever drawn to the scent of war, surged across the segmentum solar. Wah! Skargor smashed through the outer systems of the segmentum obscurus, consuming worlds in an orgy of violence. It was the wolves who led the counterhunt. Great companies deployed alongside the Astra Militarum and the Titan Legios, striking at the orc supply lines, burning their shipyards, and assassinating their war bosses in precision strikes. Where others waged open war, the rout hunted with the patience of Fenrisian wolves, bringing down a mammoth, bleeding it until it collapsed under its own weight. In the end, Skargor's Wah collapsed into infighting, as the wolves predicted. The survivors were hunted to extinction on the frozen plains of Karagon Theta. Then came darker, stranger threats, the rising of the Uranthus cults, worshippers of warp entities too ancient and alien to name. The wolves answered, sending rune priests into the depths of forbidden cities to sever the cults at their roots. The rune priests fought not only with storm and lightning, but with rites and wards passed down since the earliest days of Asaheim, ancient defenses against demonic corruption. On the ice world of Morok, entire populations were consumed by the creeping shadows of the enslaver plague. Whole regiments of the Astra Militarum were reduced to thralls. The wolves landed amidst the frozen apocalypse, deploying not to save, but to cleanse. The entire planet was purged in a brutal campaign of fire and blade, the enslavers banished back into the warp, the survivors given swift, merciful deaths. It was a grim period, a time of necessary cruelties. But throughout these centuries, another kind of war brewed closer to home. The administratum grew ever more powerful. The High Lords of Terra, secure within their palaces, grew wary of the wolves' independence. Their refusal to fully adopt the Codex Astartes, their unorthodox recruitment from Fenrisian tribes, their defiance of strict Imperial regulation, all these marked the route as troublesome. The Space Wolves, however, cared little for the jealous whispers of Terra. They answered to the Emperor and to Russ, none else. The Codex Astartes, written by Robert Leman in the wake of the heresy, was respected by most chapters. It brought order to a broken galaxy, dividing the legions into smaller chapters to prevent future rebellions. But the wolves refused to fracture. Their great companies operated like autonomous packs, bound by brotherhood, not bureaucracy. The High Lords sent envoys, inquisitors, and petitioners to enforce compliance. The wolves sent them home with frost in their beards and fear in their hearts. One infamous envoy, Lord Auditor Veritus, dared to attempt a full audit of the chapter's strength. He arrived at the Fang with an entire retinue of scribes, lex mechanics, and enforcers. He found himself sitting before a feast table, surrounded by warriors who laughed and drank as he read his demands aloud. The Wolf Lords answered his questions with riddles, sagas, and half-truths. His scribes recorded nothing but howls and toasts. By the third night, Veritas fled the Fang, his hair turned white, his mind shattered by visions whispered to him by the rune priests. Visions of Fenris's cold eternity. The Adeptus Terra learned at last to leave the route alone. The Inquisition, too, watched the wolves with suspicion. Their use of rune priests, their resistance to oversight, their tolerance of the curse of the Wolfen, all marked them as dangerously unorthodox. But none dared confront them directly. For each inquisitor who pondered action, there were tales of the Fang's defenses, of the ferocity of the great companies, of the rune priests' unsettling powers. And always the legend of Leman Russ hovered over them like a shadow. The wolves maintained their sacred duty. They continued to draw their recruits from the death world of Fenris. The ancient trials remained unchanged. The trials of Morkai, the implantation of the Canis Helix, the battle against the beast within. Aspirants either became sky warriors, or they vanished into the Wolfen curse, a fate pitied but respected. The sagas grew with each generation. The Long Watch continued. For over 10,000 years, the Space Wolves endured as the Imperium shifted and fractured. The High Lords rose and fell. Entire sectors were lost to alien invasions, to warp storms, to civil unrest. Yet the Fong still stood beneath Asaheim's frozen moons. The howls of the rout still echoed across the stars. Every Wolf Lord ruled as his own king, but each carried the unspoken duty left to them by Russ. to stand ready for the wolf time. And so they watched. When great threats stirred, they answered. When distant sectors cried for aid, they answered. When the Imperium itself forgot them, they endured. For they are the Vulca Fenrica. They are the watchful guardians, and they wait still for the Wolf King's return. There is a darkness that lies beneath the saga of the Space Wolves, a secret shame, a hidden price for their power. The beast within, the Wolfen. From the earliest days of the rout, the Canis Helix granted the Vulca Fenrica their incredible strength, resilience, and feral instincts. But for some, the Helix does not fully submit to the warrior's will. For some, the wolf overtakes the man. Flesh twists, bones lengthen, minds fracture into raw hunger. They become something between man and beast, a creature of fang, claw, and instinct. The Wolfen. For millennia, the Wolfen were whispered of but rarely seen. Those who succumbed during the trials were quietly taken from the great companies. Some said they were cast into the depths beneath the fang. Others spoke of hidden crypts where the Wolfen slumbered, their fate unknown. The rune priests and wolf priests kept these secrets locked behind sacred oaths. The Imperium knew little of these cursed brethren, and for 10,000 years the wolves controlled the secret well. But the curse was never gone. And when the stars changed, when the galaxy itself began to fracture beneath the pressure of chaos's ascendancy, the curse returned with a vengeance. It began as omens. On Fenris, the skies darkened unnaturally. The seas boiled without reason. The twin moons of Asaheim hung red for weeks. The rune priests gathered in uneasy councils, reading the runes, hearing whispers carried on the howling winds. Then came the first sightings, scattered reports of strange shapes stalking the ice fields, howling at moons, slaying great ice worms with terrifying ferocity. Packs of creatures, larger than any man, faster than any wolf, moving together with unnatural purpose. At first, many believed them to be mere wild beasts, but the wolf priests knew better. These were Wolfen, but not like the lost souls hidden beneath the fang. These Wolfen were not mindless berserkers. They displayed pack coordination, hunting strategy, and unnatural unity. More disturbing still was the warp sign that clung to their presence, as though the veil between reality and the warp had thinned around them. The curse had returned, but it was changing. Then came the first howls beyond Fenris. Across the Imperium's northern marches, strange reports echoed from distant war zones. Imperial outposts described terrifying warriors with lupine features leading attacks against chaos cults and Xenos infestations. Entire warbands of Wolfen tore through heretics and demons with horrifying efficiency, then vanished back into the void. The wolves were stunned. These were not uncontrolled mutations. These were warriors, space wolves. Their lost brethren returned. But from where? The rune priests searched the skeins of fate, delving into the ancient sagas. And in their visions, a name returned. The 13th Great Company, the Lost Pack. Long ago, in the days before Russ's disappearance, the 13th Great Company had vanished into the warp while pursuing the Thousand Suns during their retreat into the Eye of Terror. No message ever returned. No survivors emerged. For millennia, the rout assumed them lost, consumed by the warp's horrors. But now, against all reason, they had returned. The Wolfen were the warriors of the 13th, transformed and twisted by their long exile in the warp, but somehow retaining their loyalty and purpose. The rune priests declared it a sign, a harbinger of the wolf time. Their reappearance, however, brought more than hope. It brought danger. The Inquisition responded swiftly. To them, the return of the Wolfen reeked of corruption. Mutants were to be purged. The Adeptus Mechanicus feared genetic instability that could spread through the chapter. The ecclesiarchy whispered of heresy and demonic possession. Envoys were dispatched, demands were made, but the rout would not submit their returning brothers to the knives of Terra's cowards. The Wolf Lords stood united, forming a wall before the Fang's gates. "The Wolfen are our kin," they declared. "They have not fallen. They have endured what none of you could survive." Still, the tensions boiled dangerously close to war. Inquisitorial fleets hovered at the edge of Fenrisian space. Adeptus Mechanicus ships orbited at distance, scanning and watching, their magi eager to dissect and study. The wolves prepared for battle, not against the enemies of mankind, but against the very Imperium they had sworn to protect. What stayed open conflict was not diplomacy, but necessity. The galaxy itself was shattering. Even as the debate raged, the warp storm known as the Cicatrix Maledictum began to tear open reality. The Great Rift split the galaxy in two, casting entire sectors into isolated darkness. Chaos surged like a flood. Demon armies burst forth, leading black crusades into vulnerable Imperial territories. The dark gods moved, and with them came the Thousand Sons. Magnus, risen now as a demon Primarch, led his sons once more into real space. With newfound power and an endless tide of warp-spawned horrors, he marched upon Fenris itself, seeking vengeance for Prospero, for his broken brotherhood, for ancient wounds that still festered. The planet of the wolves burned. The 13th Great Company fought alongside the rest of the rout, their claws and fangs tearing into demonic flesh. The rune priests summoned great storms, howling gales that swept away warp horrors. Wolf Lords led counter-assaults into Magnus's own bastions. The battle raged across Asaheim's frozen wastes, from the mountain passes to the vaults beneath the Fong. But even the courage of Fenris could not hold forever against a demon Primarch. It was then that unexpected salvation arrived. Robute Guilliman, newly returned from stasis, led the Indomitus Crusade into Fenrisian space. His Primaris forces, guided by the Archmagos Belisarius Call and shielded by the mighty Grey Knights, descended into the war zone. Together with the wolves, they broke the Thousand Sons' advance. Magnus was driven back into the warp once more, but the scars remained. The wolves had held, but their world was forever changed. In the aftermath, Guilliman offered gifts, the Primaris gene seed, new warriors born of Call's tinkering, and the Emperor's design. Many within the rout viewed the offer with deep suspicion. The old ways had served them for 10,000 years. The Canis Helix was already a dangerous, untamable strain. To tamper further with Russ's legacy was blasphemy to some, yet others saw the necessity. The galaxy was descending into apocalypse. The Great Rift had sundered worlds. Entire sectors were lost. The enemies of man swarmed with renewed fury. Even the sons of Russ could not hold the line forever alone. In the end, the Fang accepted Guilliman's offer, but on their own terms. The Primaris Space Wolves were inducted into the pack, but made to walk the same paths as any aspirant. They would face the trials of Morkai. They would feel the pull of the Canis Helix. They would become sky warriors of Fenris. Or they would not survive at all. And so the Wolfen walked once more alongside their brothers. Their howls joined the long song of the Fang. Their claws tore at the enemies of mankind. They were cursed, but they were not broken. They were still the Vulca Fenrica. And as the galaxy slid further into the dark, the wolves of Fenris stood ready once again for the battles to come, for the wolf time was no longer distant. The wolf time was here. The sagas had long whispered of it. The wolf time. A prophecy carried down from the earliest days, from the breath of Leman Russ, himself before his disappearance. A time when the stars would bleed, when brother would turn on brother, when the Imperium would teeter on the brink and the Wolf King would return for the final hunt. Now at last that time had come. The galaxy was broken. The cicatrix maledictum, the great rift, cut the Imperium in two, dividing Terra from its outer domains. Astronomican light flickered and failed across entire sectors. Nightmares roamed the void freely. Warp storms swallowed systems whole. Communication became prayer and guesswork. Even the Emperor's guiding beacon, blazing from the Golden Throne, seemed dimmer. Everywhere, chaos surged. Demon armies spilled from the Eye of Terror in endless tides, emboldened by the rift's opening. Black crusades marched with renewed fury. Heretic warbands, emboldened by the disarray, struck at loyal worlds like carrion crows. Xenos empires rose in the dark places once held at bay by the light of the Imperium. And amidst this collapse the wolves stood, their vigil unbroken. Fenris endured, but the storm was closing in. The wolf lords gathered at the stone table once more. The Fang's war horns echoed through Asaheim's icy peaks, calling the packs home. Every great company returned, battered, bloodied from campaigns scattered across the Imperium Nihilus and beyond, but unbowed. Ragnar Blackmane, young and hungry for battle. Logan Grimnar, the old wolf whose wisdom guided them. Harold Deathwolf, his Thunderwolf cavalry snarling beneath him. Bjorn Stormwolf, the fleet's master. Egil Ironwolf, whose armored columns ground enemies beneath their treads. Crom Dragongaze, burning with wrath, all answered the call. Even the Wolfen stood among them, silent but present. Once a hidden shame, now accepted as brethren returned. The rune priests read the omens with growing dread. The runes spoke of old powers stirring, of the Wolf King's shadow moving once more beyond the veil, of great hunts yet to be unleashed upon the stars. The wolf time was not mere apocalypse, it was fulfillment. Their oaths, carried for 10,000 years, were nearing their final test. As the wolves howled beneath Fenris's twin moons, the drums of war sounded louder than ever before. It was not long before the first blow fell. The Black Legion, driven by Abaddon's 13th Black Crusade, surged across the broken northern sectors. Cadia was gone, reduced to ruin in the opening salvos of the Rift's creation. The fortress world that had once stood as the Imperium's northern anchor had fallen beneath the War Master's hand. With Cadia gone, the Eye of Terror bled its filth across the stars unchecked. The wolves answered. They led strike fleets into the war zones abandoned by the crippled Segmentum Militarum. Great companies fought alone, outnumbered but never outmatched, launching kill raids against Black Legion supply lines, assassinating Dark Apostles, sabotaging demon forges. In the void of Aegir's Maw, Grimnar's company boarded Abaddon's vanguard ships directly, storming through demon-infested decks, while Grey Knights sealed warp rifts behind them. They carved a path of slaughter through the Black Legion's forward spearheads, delaying the War Master's advance into the Segmentum Pacificus. Where the Imperium staggered, the rout hunted. The worlds near the Eye begged for aid. The wolves answered their cries not with diplomacy, but with steel. On Skjoldheim, a hive world beset by demon hosts, Ragnar Blackmane led a desperate relief assault. His forces dropped directly into the warp-blasted spires, engaging the demonic in brutal street fighting while the Inquisition declared the planet beyond saving. The wolves fought not for strategic gain, but for the simple principle that the strong do not abandon the weak. Entire great companies were bled white to save the defenseless. Many questioned their choices. The High Lord saw wasteful expenditure of Astartes' lives. But the rout answered to a higher calling. They were not just space marines. They were the Vulca Fenrica. And still, the howls grew louder. Across the rift, new horrors emerged. The Tyranids surged into Segmentum Ultima, Hive Fleet Leviathan, launching fresh tendrils across the void. The eastern fringe burned as the Great Devourer consumed worlds faster than Imperial reinforcements could be dispatched. The wolves did not hesitate. They hunted where they could. On Fenris Secundus, Ragnar Blackmane and Crom Dragongaze deployed alongside Ultramarines and White Scars, launching coordinated planetary strikes to sever Leviathan's synapse nodes. Where Tyranid biobehemoths towered over the battlefield, Fenrisian cavalry charged beneath their shadow, frost axes splitting chitin while thunderwolves tore into exposed nerve clusters. The rout adapted as only predators can. But the Tyranids were not their only concern. Beneath the storms of war, darker enemies stirred. The Thousand Suns, led once more by Magnus the Red, struck at Fenris again, launching psychic incursions, trying to breach the defenses of the Fang itself. This was not a war of armies alone, but of sorcery and will. The rune priests fought titanic battles in the warp's currents, warding off demonic incursions while Bolter and Blade held the line in real space. Even the Wolfen were unleashed within the Fang's halls, tearing apart warp phantoms that dared cross its sacred wards. The wolves stood unbroken, but they bled. Fenris itself groaned beneath the weight of these assaults. Ancient defenses, built since the days of Russ, strained to contain the warp's assaults. Rune priests called upon forbidden rites. Iron priests activated war engines that had slumbered for millennia beneath the Fang's roots. The planet became not merely a fortress, but a beacon of defiance. And all the while, as the battles raged, the omens of Russ's return grew stronger. The rune priests whispered that the Wolf King's spirit stirred in the distant stars, that his voice called to them from beyond the void, beyond the great rift itself. Some believed he hunted in realms unknown, battling the great beasts of chaos themselves in preparation for the final reckoning. Others feared darker portents, that his struggle was not yet victorious, and the day of his return would coincide with mankind's final trial. But whether hope or dread, one truth remained. The wolf time was no longer a distant future. It was now. And still the Vulca Fenrica endured. Their numbers were thinned. Entire great companies reduced to shadows of their former strength. The Primarch reinforcements, born of Call's new gene forging, helped replenish their ranks. But the old ways and the new stood side by side uneasily. The Canis Helix burned in these new suns, just as it did in the old, but its effects remained unpredictable. The rout balanced tradition with survival, the old blood guiding the new. Throughout the Imperium, they fought as few others could. Not as bureaucratic pawns of terror, nor as mere warriors for hire, but as guardians of mankind's frontier. Always outnumbered, always outgunned, but never outhunted. They did not seek honor in council chambers. They did not petition the high lords for favor. They hunted. The galaxy slid toward collapse. The forces of chaos marched at the head of a galactic storm. The orcs gathered in unprecedented numbers for new way. The Tyranids devoured star systems with terrifying hunger. The Necrons reawakened across forgotten tomb worlds, and above all, the Great Rift tore deeper through reality, warping time, splitting empires, drowning entire sectors in demonic shadow. The howl of the end times echoed across the stars. But on Fenris, beneath the frozen moons, the rout still gathered. Their oaths still held. They had awaited the wolf time for 10,000 years, and when it came, they were ready. The Wolf King was not yet returned, but his sons still hunted. The wolf time had begun, but the rout would not face it alone. In the darkest hours of the galaxy's breaking, a new breed of warrior entered the sagas of Fenris, the Primarch wolves. Their arrival was not heralded with fanfare or song. It came as a storm of questions, of suspicion, of unspoken fears. For 10,000 years, the Space Wolves had endured. They had preserved their ways, their rituals, their ancient rites that predated the Codex Astartes. The Canis Helix, as wild and dangerous as it was, had been their bond to Russ. It defined who they were and who survived. Now came Guillemon's gift, or Guillemon's intrusion, depending on who told the tale. The Primarch of Macraga, newly risen from his long stasis, led the Indomitus Crusade through the shattered Imperium, wielding a reforged vision of the Imperium's salvation. Part of that salvation was the Primaris Astartes, a new generation of warriors, larger, stronger, faster, engineered from secret work conducted for millennia in the shadows of Terra. The Wolves did not ask for these warriors, but they came. The first vessels bearing Primaris reinforcements arrived at Fenris under the banners of the Adeptus Mechanicus, their holds filled with warriors who bore the gene seed of Russ, yet had never seen Asaheim, never survived the trial of Morkai, never hunted the Deathlands beneath the gaze of Morkai's shadow. They spoke in crisp, high Gothic, not the ancient Fenrisian tongue. Their armor gleamed without the scars of ritual. They called their formations intercessors, hellblasters, aggressors, names foreign to the ears of the old rout. The Wolf Lords received them with guarded eyes. Logan Grimnar, the Great Wolf, stood beneath the vaulted halls of the Fang and beheld these towering warriors. They bore the fangs of Russ, their eyes burned golden with the Canis Helix. But there was something unfamiliar beneath their proud stances. The question hung unsaid. Were they truly sons of Fenris? The rune priests circled warily. The wolf priests performed rites to examine their souls. Many feared that tampering with the gene forge had twisted what should not be touched. The Canis Helix was always unstable. Who was to say how it would express itself within these giants? But beneath the frost of suspicion, necessity gnawed like winter hunger. The rout had bled heavily. The great rift had torn countless great companies asunder. The wolves stood at half their ancient strength, facing enemies growing stronger by the hour. Reinforcements could not be ignored. Logan Grimnar made his decision. The Primaris wolves would be given a chance, but on Fenris's terms. They would not be handed rank. They would not be given command. They would walk the path of the rout, as every son of Russ before them had done. The Primaris wolves were inducted into the trials of Morkai. Stripped of their polished warplate, they were cast into Asaheim's Deathlands. They faced the freezing winds, the howling worms, the endless nights beneath ice-lit moons. Many died. Many more came close, but those who returned from the frozen wilds were not the same men who had landed from Guillemon's ships. They returned marked by Fenris. The trial of the Canis Helix came next. Though their bodies had already been strengthened by Kahl's methods, the ritual implantation was repeated, reforging them fully into the Vulca Fenrica. The beast within stirred anew. The fangs lengthened, the eyes burned brighter. The instincts of the hunter whispered beneath their skin. Some were lost, their minds consumed by the Wolfen curse, but many survived. The old blood and the new mingled. In the great feasting halls of the Fang, the Primaris wolves earned their place. They drank Njord from the skulls of Kraken. They joined the sagas, learning to sing as warriors of the rout. They learned the tongue of Fenris, not from scholars, but from their brothers around the fire. They told their tales of war, and in turn heard the ancient sagas of Russ. Slowly, suspicion gave way to brotherhood. They took their place within the pack structure. Some joined as blood claws. Though their size dwarfed their battle-hungry peers, their inexperience placed them among the young. Others, already veterans of Guillemon's crusades, earned the trust of Grey Hunters and Wolfguard alike. Even the towering Redemptors, the Primaris Dreadnoughts, walked alongside ancient Castraferum Dreadnoughts from the Great Crusade, their howls joining the chorus of the old machines. But the Canis Helix remained wild. Even among the Primaries, the Wolfen curse stirred unpredictably. Some Primaris wolves fell to the beast within, becoming towering Wolfen, unlike any seen before, their massive forms even more terrifying in their primal wrath. Yet even these were not cast out. The rout had long since learned to honor rather than shun the cursed brethren. The Wolfen remained warriors of the pack, unleashed in the most desperate battles where their ferocity could turn the tide. The Imperium at large watched with unease. The High Lords hoped the Primaris wolves would civilize the rout, bring them closer to Codex standards. But Leman understood the truth. In private council with Grimnar, he spoke as a Primarch to the sons of another. "You are not like the others, old wolf," Leman said. "You never were, and that is why we need you." The wolves, for their part, accepted the Primaris gift, but they remained unchanged at their core. The Codex Astartes was still viewed as advice, not law. The pack structure remained. The great companies ruled themselves. The Wolf Lords answered to each other and to the Great Wolf, not to Terra's bureaucrats. The Primaris wolves learned quickly. They fought alongside their brothers against threats old and new. In the burning spires of Vigilus, they battled alongside Ultramarines and Blood Angels against the rising tides of Chaos and Genestealer cults. Their Primaris intercessors formed unbreakable firing lines, while Bloodclaws and Reavers hunted through the ruins. Thunderwolf cavalry and aggressor squads combined their fury in brutal charges. In the frozen void of the Ironhold Belt, they repelled a Necron awakening that threatened to unleash tomb fleets into the Imperium Nihilus. The Primaris Inceptors, with their jump packs blazing, rained plasma death upon awakening monoliths, while rune priests shattered Necron phalanxes with lightning storms summoned from the void itself. On Mordrax Maw, they stood against Abaddon's spearhead forces, driving back the Black Legion's forward push into the Segmentum Solar. The Primaris Battle Brothers earned new sagas in the blood of Chaos warbands. Through every battle, the Primaris wolves shed the last of their foreign ways. They became Fenrisian not by birth, but by ordeal, by choice, by blood. The Fang's halls filled once more. The wolf priests inscribed new names into the saga stones. The rune priests sang new songs of the old blood, reborn in new flesh. The old wolves taught the young giants how to hunt, how to fight not as soldiers of the Codex, but as sons of Russ. The rout was whole again. But even now, beneath their resurgence, the shadow of the wolf time loomed larger. The galaxy's wound continued to bleed. The Primaris wolves, like their older brothers, would face horrors yet unseen. The Great Rift continued to grow. The enemies of mankind gathered at every corner of the void. The Wolf King's shadow still stirred beyond the veil. The saga of the Primaris wolves had begun, but the greatest hunts still awaited. The Great Rift had torn the Imperium in two. The Cicatrix Maledictum cleaved across the stars like the wound of a dying god, dividing the realms of mankind into light and shadow. On one side, the Astronomican's flickering beacon still reached out from Terra. On the other, entire sectors drifted into isolation and madness, trapped within the Imperium Nihilus, cut off from guidance, from reinforcement, from hope. Yet it was into this darkness that the Vulca Fenrica now cast their gaze. The wolves had never feared the storm. For centuries, the rout had defended the borders of the Eye of Terror. They knew the taste of warp-born horrors, of corrupted stars and haunted voids. The Eye's darkness was familiar to them in ways few other chapters could stomach. The Great Rift, for all its apocalyptic fury, was simply a larger hunt. They called it the Hunt Beyond the Rift. It began with a simple truth. The Imperium Nihilus could not hold without help. Entire star systems screamed for aid. Isolated fortress worlds, loyal hive cities, shrinking forge enclaves all stood alone against waves of Xenos and heretics who swarmed like jackals in the lightless gulf. Most of the Imperium's fleets dared not cross the rift. Even Guilliman's Indomitus crusade, mighty as it was, struggled to breach the warp storms that swallowed whole armadas. But the Space Wolves were not most. The Wolf Lords gathered in the Fang beneath the banners of Asaheim. Each great company brought forth its warships, its warriors, its oaths. Logan Grimnar, the old wolf himself, spoke of the duty left to them by Russ, to stand where others faltered, to go where others feared. They would not wait for the rift to close. They would cross it. Their warships, hardened by centuries of void war, set sail into the teeth of the warp. The Fang's fleet was ancient, vessels passed down from the Great Crusade, maintained by the Iron Priests with stubborn, almost superstitious reverence. Their hulls bore runes and wards against the warp's madness, while the rune priests sang incantations that calmed the howling void. Even so, every crossing was a gamble. Storms lashed at the hulls. Temporal eddies twisted days into weeks, weeks into moments. Demons clawed at the Geller fields. Reality itself flickered between breaths. But the wolves endured. They emerged into the Imperium Nihilus, like predators into an unguarded pasture. What they found was worse than the rune priest's darkest visions. Entire sectors had fallen into anarchy. Cults of the dark gods ruled openly, offering up worlds in sacrifice to the ruinous powers. Genestealer cults erupted from the lower hives of abandoned planets, welcoming the tyrannid vanguard. Orc warlords built vast empires upon the bones of broken worlds, their war banners blotting out the light of distant suns. The wolves did not flinch. The eternal hunt began. Great companies scattered across the Nihilus, each choosing its own prey. Ragnar Blackmane led swift strikes against Orc strongholds, hitting fast and hard before the Greenskins could gather their full strength. His Primaris packs, intercessors, rivers, inceptors worked alongside his veteran Bloodclaws, leaping into war zones with reckless precision, shattering Wah before they could metastasize into sector-crushing invasions. Bjorn Stormwolf took his fleet to harry Chaos warbands, ambushing supply convoys and crippling demon-forged cruisers before they could reinforce Abaddon's dark crusades. His Wolfguard fought shipboard battles in the flickering half-light of void hulks, their frost claws slicing through Black Legion boarding parties as plasma storms lit the corridors. Harald Deathwolf brought his Thunderwolf cavalry into the frozen wastelands of Syndax Prime, leading a campaign against the Word-bearers who had raised demon temples amid the blizzards. Rune priests clashed against dark apostles in duels of faith and will, the howling storms themselves turning into battlefields of the mind. In each system, the Vilka Fenrika did not conquer. They hunted. They struck at the leaders, the power sources, the warp rifts, culling the strongest and letting the lesser threats devour each other in the chaos that followed. Their war was one of controlled savagery, but the warp answered. The hunt beyond the rift was not without its predators. Strange new creatures emerged from the warp storms, entities unlike the known demonic hosts. Shadowed beasts of flickering forms, their bodies shifting with the tides of unreality, immune to conventional bolter rounds, whispering madness into the minds of entire companies. Some scholars called them warp phantoms, others whispered that they were new forms of chaos altogether. Formless entities spawned from the rift's deep wound. The wolves adapted. The rune priests delved deeper into the sagas of old Asaheim, calling upon the oldest rites once used to banish Fenrisian sea worms and ice specters. Warding circles were inscribed on battle barge hulls. Great runestones were planted into corrupted ground to stabilize reality's fraying skin. Every battle became part exorcism, part extermination. It was a war unlike any before. In the isolated Dracos expanse, a warp maelstrom swallowed entire systems, transforming them into twisted echoes of real space. Bjorn Stormwolf's fleet became trapped for over 4 years, or perhaps only 4 days, depending on whose chronometers were trusted. Within that storm, his warriors fought against nightmares that mocked the faces of their lost brothers, battling entities that shifted between the forms of slain wolf lords. The Iron Priests sacrificed entire engines to keep Geller fields intact, while the Rune Priests sang for Russ's guidance. When they finally escaped, their numbers were halved, but their sagas became legend. On the shattered world of Skull's Gate, the Black Legion attempted to establish a permanent warp breach, anchoring demonic forces to real space through vast sacrificial engines. The wolves struck with every great company within reach. The Wolfen were unleashed as the vanguard, tearing through demon cohorts like rabid avatars of the wild. Behind them, the Primaris aggressors cleared kill zones with waves of plasma, while wolf priests led the old blood in coordinated strike packs that dismantled the heretic fortresses stone by stone. Even as reality bled at the edges of the battle, the wolves held the line. The breach was sealed. The heretic architects were executed beneath the shattered moons. The cost was high, but Skull's Gate did not fall, and still the hunt continued. The longer the wolves hunted within the Imperium Nihilus, the more their legend spread. Isolated outposts saw them as avenging spirits. Civilians whispered of gray-armored saviors who arrived from the void without warning, slaying the worst horrors, then vanishing into the warp before gratitude could be offered. They became specters to some, myths to others. To the traitors, they were terror incarnate, a death that hunted in silence, unseen until the moment the blade struck. Yet even the rout knew their limits. The rift grew worse. The warp storms intensified. The flow of reinforcements became ever more perilous. Even the rune priests could not always chart safe passage. The wolf lords gathered again at the edge of the rift. They had carved a bloody path through chaos, warbands, Xenos empires, and warp-born monstrosities. But the rift was endless. It could not be sealed, only endured. Logan Grimnar made the call. The eternal hunt would continue, but not at the cost of the rout's extinction. The great companies would rotate, some returning to Fenris to rebuild, others pressing onward into the Nihilus as hunters. The hunt beyond the rift had become their eternal war, and still the omens whispered. The Wolf King remained absent, but his shadow loomed closer. The rune priests spoke of distant echoes, of growls carried on warp winds from beyond even the rift's edges. Some believed that Russ himself hunted in the deepest corners of the warp, battling creatures beyond mortal comprehension in preparation for his destined return. The wolf time was not yet done, and the wolves, both old blood and new, remained ready, for the hunt never ends. For 10,000 years, the Fang had stood unbroken. High atop Asaheim, its towering peaks pierced the clouds like the spears of gods. Its halls were carved into the mountain's roots, its chambers lined with the bones of heroes whose sagas stretched back to the age of the Emperor himself. Its vaults held the gene seed of Russ, the wisdom of rune priests, the forged chambers of the Iron Priests, and the ancient relics carried from the Great Crusade. The Fang was not simply a fortress. It was the beating heart of the rout, and in the days of the wolf time, even the Fang would be tested. The wolves had long made enemies beyond count. Across the stars, those who had felt the bite of Fenrisian steel whispered of vengeance. Chaos warlords, Xenos, arch-enemies, treacherous rogue elements within the Imperium itself, all watched the rising tide of the Great Rift and saw an opportunity. The time of the wrath of the Fang began as a whisper. Strange omens danced upon Fenris's frozen seas. The moon ice cracked unnaturally, great rifts splitting the ice fields at strange angles. Fenrisian sea worms, once silent, thrashed madly as if sensing something unnatural in the depths. The rune priests gathered in the high sanctum, casting runes, their chants uneasy. The runes burned with the mark of the eye. Soon came the first strike. The Alpha Legion moved first, their ships slipping into Fenrisian space under false identities and Vox silent engines. Using stolen Imperial clearance codes, they infiltrated the outer system's defense stations, planting sabotage teams disguised as loyal personnel. Vox traffic was corrupted, astropathic signals were scrambled. Communication between the outer moons and Asaheim itself faltered. When the first orbital defense platforms exploded in synchrony, the Wolves realized they had been deceived. Within hours, the Fang's fleet was forced to scatter, intercepting multiple waves of hostile warships now closing in under the Alpha Legion's coordinated assault. But the Hydra did not attack alone. As the Fang's defenders engaged the infiltrators, a greater horror emerged from behind the warp storms. Magnus had returned. The Crimson King, still thirsting for vengeance from the days of Prospero's burning, led his 1,000 sons directly toward Fenris itself. No longer merely an invasion, this was a reckoning. Magnus sought to finish what he had once begun, to break the Fang, to unmake the Vilka Fenrika, and to desecrate their ancient halls. The battle began in orbit. Waves of sorcerous warp craft lashed the Space Wolves fleet as demon-forged cruisers of the 1,000 Suns phased into real space. The void churned with warp energy as the Fang's orbital bastions turned their guns skyward. Torpedo salvos lit the night like falling stars. Lance batteries ripped into the lead sorcerer ships, but for each vessel destroyed, more emerged from the warp's bleeding edge. The defenders of the Fang prepared for siege. Logan Grimnar himself stood upon the highest platform beneath the towering Wolf of Asaheim statue, issuing orders to the great companies assembling below. Rune priests chanted binding rites into the mountain's roots. Iron priests activated defense systems not seen since the Great Crusade. Shield generators thrummed with ancient power. The Fang had been built to weather extinction, but the 1,000 Suns had learned much in their long exile within the warp. They did not rely on force alone. As the sorcerer crafts bombarded Fenris's surface, the warp itself twisted. Psychers among the 1,000 Suns tore at reality, forcing breaches in the thin fabric of the veil. Small warp rifts appeared near the Fang's walls, vomiting forth hosts of demons, Tsengor herds, lords of change, and shrieking horrors that writhed through the air like insects of unreality. Yet the wolves did not yield. Wolfguard kill teams intercepted the demon packs before they reached the fortress. Bolter fire echoed across the mountain passes. Fenrisian wolves released from their pens hunted alongside their masters, ripping demonic flesh from bone. At the outer gates, wolfen packs were unleashed. They tore into the demonic hordes with primal fury, their monstrous forms perfectly suited to face warp-spawned abominations. Where demonic talons tore flesh, wolfen claws ripped deeper. The ice itself turned crimson beneath their struggle. Then the true assault began. Magnus descended. Wreathed in warp flame, his form towering over the battlefield, he brought the skies low with his sorcery. Entire sections of the Fang's outer walls were reduced to rubble as the Crimson King personally led his war covens into the breach. But the rout did not falter. Logan Grimnar and his Wolf Guard charged into the heart of the breach. With Frostfang in hand, the mighty axe that had served him across 1,000 wars, Grimnar met the first wave of rubric marines head-on, his pack tearing through the dust-clad automatons in a storm of ceramite shards. The rune priests waged psychic duels against the Thousand Suns covens, their stormcraft lashing out as psychic lightning and runic winds battled against warp flame and sorceress shields. Each duel was a test of will, of soul, of unbreakable faith. The Iron Priests activated long-forgotten war engines, ancient macro-servitors and automated plasma emplacements buried beneath the Fang since the time of Russ himself. The mountain's roots shook as these ancient guardians roared to life. Through days of unbroken war, the battle raged across the Fang's tiers. Demon engines breached the inner halls, their warp cannons turning statues of ancient heroes into molten slag. In response, the Primarch aggressor squads formed defensive phalanxes in the inner sanctums, their plasma gauntlets vaporizing the war machines in carefully coordinated volleys. The Fang itself bled. Vaults once untouched were desecrated. Statues of Russ were shattered by psychic barrages. The Great Hall of Sagas, where the names of every wolf lord were etched into stone, became a battleground where wolf god terminators stood in stubborn defiance, holding the line as demon hordes clawed toward the very heart of their legacy. Yet the wolves refused to break. In the final act of the siege, Grimnar led a counterattack directly toward Magnus himself. The Crimson King stood before the shattered gates of the Hall of Heroes, his gaze cold, his form glowing with unnatural light. The wolf god charged, frost claws and thunder hammers flashing beneath the aurora-lit sky. Wulfin and Primaris warriors followed in their wake, howling. Grimnar and Magnus clashed, not for the first time, but perhaps for the last. Frostfang bit into Magnus's sorceress shields, its rune-forged blade cutting through wards spun from the warp's heart. Magnus answered with crushing blows of psychic force, cracking ceramite and splintering stone beneath Grimnar's feet. Around them, the battle reached a fever pitch. Wulfin tore through rubrici lines. Rune priests bound demons within wards of cold lightning. Wolfguard terminators dragged wounded brethren from collapsing chambers, refusing to leave a single brother behind. Though he could not match Magnus's raw power, Grimnar's will was unbreakable. Each blow carried with it the weight of Russ's legacy. Every howl behind him lent him strength. Magnus faltered. And then, as the battle neared its climax, the warp began to recede. Reinforcements arrived, elements of Guilliman's Indomitus crusade, drawn by distress calls barely whispered through the warp storms. Grey Knights, Adeptus Custodes, and elements of the Imperial Navy joined the defense, breaking the momentum of Magnus's assault. With the battle turning, Magnus withdrew, his war covens vanishing into the warp once more. The wrath of the Fang had ended. The Fang stood, scarred, bloodied, but unbroken. The wolves gathered their dead, tended their wounded, and raised their drinking horns once more within the Hall of Sagas. The names of those who fell were etched into new stones, their sagas preserved beside the heroes of old, and the howls echoed once more across the mountains. For the Vulca Fenrica endures, always. Even among the Space Wolves, where valor is measured by deeds and blades, there exists another path, older, quieter, and more dangerous. It is the path of the Rune Priests. They are not librarians, as the other chapters name their psychers, nor are they sorcerers, as the accursed Thousand Suns became. The Rune Priests are shamans of Fenris, heirs to the spirit ways older than the Imperium itself. They do not command the warp so much as bargain with it, channel it, walk alongside its currents with the caution of men stalking a great beast. Their role has always been more than battle. It is they who read the skies and seas of Fenris, who whisper with the storm winds, who listen to the songs of the world spirit that pulses beneath Asaheim's mountains. In times of peace, they tend the rituals of the pack. In times of war, they unleash storms of psychic fury to protect the Fang. But it is in their prophecies that their truest burden lies, for the rune priests see the currents of fate, and of late the currents have grown wild. In the aftermath of the wrath of the Fang, as the walls were rebuilt and the halls cleansed, the rune priests gathered in the Stormcaller's sanctum, a chamber deep beneath the Fang, known only to their order. There, the air is thick with incense. Great stone circles etched with runes of protection form the floor. In its center, a pool of black water reflects not the ceiling above, but visions drawn from the warp's restless tides. The high rune priest, Stormcaller Einar Thundertongue, led the council. His beard was silvered by centuries. His eyes glowed faintly with the pale blue of lightning held in check. Around him sat the oldest of his order, joined by young rune, priests barely blooded in battle. All had seen the shadows growing. The runes they cast fell heavy. The first visions were of the Great Rift itself, a wound that could not heal, a tear in reality that bled warp storms across the stars. The Cicatrix Maledictum was not simply a storm. It was a fracture in the Emperor's dominion. Through it, dark things moved freely. Demons whispered to the weak. Chaos fleets sailed unimpeded. And in the heart of the storm, something vast stirred. A presence older than the Eye of Terror, hungering still. The rune priests saw war unending. Sectors swallowed whole. Once proud Imperial worlds twisted into demon realms overnight. New chaos warlords rose, while others, like Abaddon, only grew more powerful. They glimpsed strange shapes, warp beasts with too many eyes, worlds writhing as if alive, tides of warp matter surging like sentient oceans. But that was not all they saw. Beneath the fury of chaos, the Xenos empires too were rising. The Tyrannid hive fleets twisted toward new territories, learning, adapting. The Necrons, ancient and implacable, awakened in greater numbers. Entire tomb worlds that had slumbered for eons now blazed with pale light as silent legions marched once more. Even the Eldari, fractured though they were, danced on the edge of oblivion, while new threats whispered from corners of the galaxy, unknown even to the most ancient records of Terra. And yet, through all this doom, the rune priest's visions returned again and again to a single image, a lone figure striding through the darkness, a wolf, not a beast of Fenris, but something greater, a shadow, golden-eyed and armored in ancient warplate, standing defiant against the tide, a howl that pierced the void itself. The Wolf King, Leman Russ. The rune priests saw him hunting across impossible realms, not within the warp as the traitor sorcerers did, but in some strange place that existed between realities. His quarry was unseen, vast and terrible. His path was winding, his return uncertain. But always the visions showed one truth. Russ lived. His saga was not finished, but neither was his return certain. For the visions split and forked like branches in a storm. Some showed the Wolf King returning at the moment of mankind's final stand, leading the rout in a last charge that would echo through eternity. Others showed him lost forever, devoured by the endless hunt. Still others suggested his arrival might come too late, after the galaxy had already fallen to ruin. The rune priests debated for days beneath the earth. Some argued the visions were warnings, that the wolves must prepare for their father's return by purging weakness from their ranks. Others believed the prophecies were a call to action, that the rout must venture further into the warp, seeking the Wolf King directly. A few whispered darker fears, that Russ might return changed, a thing no longer wholly of man or god. But in the end, it was Stormcaller Einar who silenced the chamber. "The Wolf King walks his own hunt," he said. "Our task is not to find him, nor to question his fate. Our task is to hold the line until his howl returns to guide us. We are the Watch. We are the guardians of the long vigil." The other rune priests bowed in agreement, yet not all visions spoke only of Russia. Some carried omens of the Primaris wolves, whose bloodlines were still young. Strange symbols danced through the runes, hybrid beasts, unfamiliar constellations, echoes of Fenrisian runes twisted into new shapes. The Canis Helix, they feared, might yet express itself in unforeseen ways within these giants. A few rune priests worried that the Primaris gene seed, forged by Cowl's tampering, had unleashed long-dormant mutations. Already, rare reports spoke of Primaris Wolfen appearing, towering creatures of immense strength but uncertain minds. Whether this was a blessing or a curse remained unclear. There were also signs of the Wolfen's own evolution. The returned warriors of the 13th Great Company showed increasing coordination, as though their long exile in the warp had bonded them to the wolf spirit in ways even the rune priests did not fully understand. Some began to display strange psychic sensitivity, acting in eerie unity across entire battlefields, as if guided by some unseen force. And beyond all of it loomed the most disturbing of their visions, the final battle. The rune priests spoke of a great convergence, a war unlike any that had come before, a galactic storm of such scale that even the darkest days of the Horus heresy would seem pale beside it. In these glimpses, the eye of terror expanded like a bleeding sun. The great rift grew larger still. Every enemy of mankind marched at once: orcs, tyrannids, necrons, chaos, and things not yet named. And at the center of it, the rout stood. Alone? Perhaps. Or perhaps leading what remained of a broken Imperium. That was unclear. The runes only agreed on one truth. The Vilca Fenrica would stand at the heart of the wolf time. Their role would be decisive, their survival uncertain. The council of rune priests ended in silence. The omens had been read, the warnings delivered. In the halls above, the wolf lords continued their war councils, the Primaris reinforcements trained alongside the old blood. The wolfen howled at the moons as the cold wind sang through the peaks. The hunt beyond the rift still raged, and beneath it all the rune priests kept watch. Their eyes remained ever upon the shadows, waiting for the howl that would signal the return of the Wolf King. The wolf time was not ending. It was only beginning. The galaxy bled. The great rift pulsed like a wound that refused to close, vomiting forth horrors uncountable. Yet even amid this endless storm, a new war rose, one unlike any the Space Wolves had faced before. It began on the distant world of Gathis, a world of primal savagery located far beyond the Fenrisian system, on the edges of the Cicatrix Maledictum. Gathis had long been deemed of little value, a wilderness world inhabited by towering beasts, great-scaled leviathans, and tribes of feral humans too primitive for Imperial uplift. But the rift had changed everything. From the warp storms came creatures not of any known chaos pantheon, beings ancient, nameless, godlike in scale. Many whispered that they were warp echoes of the old gods slain during the war in heaven, stirring once more as reality frayed. Others believed they were newborn abominations, spawned by the warp's unrestrained hunger for worship. The Imperium's early attempts to contain the Gathis anomaly failed catastrophically. Mechanicus expeditions vanished without trace. Inquisitorial kill teams reported impossible sightings, beasts of titanic proportions whose mere presence distorted reality itself. Tribes on Gathis began to worship these entities as living gods, offering blood sacrifices in rituals that twisted their bodies and minds into monstrous forms. When the cries for aid reached Fenris, the Wolf Lords answered. Logan Grimnar gathered a war council. The reports from Gathis were dire. Entire fleets lost, planet-side armies devoured by impossible creatures, the survivors twisted into mutant cults that made even chaos warbands seem tame. But within these dark tales was something worse. Warp readings that resembled the power signatures of demons, yet fluctuated like something new, something outside even the four great powers of the ruinous pantheon. The rune priests called them the beasts beyond the veil. Ragnar Blackmane was the first to volunteer, hungry for battle, eager to lead his great company into this new hunt. He argued that this was precisely why the wolves existed, to hunt what others could not. Crom Dragongaze followed, as did Harald Deathwolf. The great companies assembled, a force larger than any the rout had unleashed in centuries. Their fleet crossed the rift at great risk, entering the void around Gathis under cover of storm-shrouded silence. The closer they approached, the more unstable the warp currents became. Iron priests labored tirelessly to keep Geller Field stable. Even the rune priests grew uneasy as strange echoes filled their minds, whispers not of chaos, but of something older, colder. Gathis appeared before them. A green jewel wrapped in swirling clouds, its oceans teeming with megafauna, its continents scarred by crater-sized sacrificial pits and towering stone monoliths. As the first strike forces descended, they met their quarry. The beasts of Gathis were unlike any Xenos or demon the wolves had faced. Towering quadrupeds with armored hides that shimmered between real space and warp essence. Creatures that bore multiple heads, their eyes burning with intelligence and malice, able to phase partially into unreality to evade attack. The wolves struck hard. Thunderwolf cavalry charged across broken plains, their mounts baying with joy as they tore into the lesser spawn herds. Aggressor squads unleashed volleys of plasma, cutting down swarms of smaller beasts with disciplined salvos. Long Fangs brought down towering leviathans with precise Lascanon strikes, targeting exposed nerve clusters beneath their armored scales. But the beasts adapted. As the campaign ground on, entire hunting packs were lost to creatures that simply vanished into the warp before striking from impossible angles. Some beasts exhaled clouds of hallucinogenic spores that broke even Astartes' discipline, sending entire squads into frenzies or stupors. Others emitted sonic howls that shattered the hearts of Primaris aggressors mid-stride. Worse still were the corrupted tribes. The human cults of Gathis, having worshipped these gods of flesh and void, had become something no longer human. Towering mutant war priests led hordes of blood-drenched fanatics who charged into bolter fire with suicidal abandon. Some wielded warp fire-infused spears capable of piercing power armor. Others detonated themselves in acts of mass sacrifice, fueling their gods with death. Rune priests unleashed storms of cold lightning in response. Frost gales tore across the sacrificial pits, freezing entire cult battalions solid. Wolf priests led counter-assaults, purging temple complexes with bolter and flame. The Wolfen, as ever, were unleashed where the fight was fiercest, their claws turning the monstrous into carrion. But then came the true threat. From the depths of Gathis' largest monolith emerged the first of the warp-touched god beasts fully awakened, a being later known to the wolves as the Father of Teeth. The creature stood tall as a hive spire, its body both flesh and nightmare. Countless jaws opened along its flanks, each singing a dissonant song of hunger that shattered vox links across the battlefield. Its skin shimmered between metallic plates and raw muscle, constantly shifting between forms as it devoured reality itself. Even the wolves' mighty firepower barely slowed its advance. Entire Grey Hunter companies were crushed beneath its bulk. Plasma bombardments struck its core, only to be absorbed into its pulsating form. It exhaled clouds of warp-borne flies that consumed flesh and ceramite alike, reducing entire squads to bone within seconds. Desperation mounted. The rune priests gathered atop a cliffside above the Father of Teeth's path, forming a ring of runes powered by the oldest rites of Asaheim. Einar Thundertongue, carried into battle upon the back of a thunder wolf, led the chant. With great sacrifice, they bound a portion of the creature's essence, forcing it to stabilize fully in real space for a brief moment. That was all the wolves needed. Ragnar Blackmane led the final charge. With the full might of his great company behind him, he drove directly into the Father of Teeth's exposed flank. Storm shields deflected acid breath long enough for melta-bombs to be planted into its core. With a final roar, Ragnar drove his frost blade through one of the creature's primary spinal cores, and the war beast collapsed in a shrieking avalanche of collapsing flesh and stone. The creature died, but not without cost. Hundreds of wolves lay slain across the plains of Gathis. The Father of Teeth was only one of several entities believed to exist on the planet. More monoliths stirred, more cults rose. The planet itself seemed alive, its crust trembling with unnatural hunger. The wolves withdrew, taking their wounded and their fallen. The Inquisition, arriving in their wake, declared exterminatus upon Gathis, bombarding the world until little remained but molten ruin. Yet even in destruction, the warning remained. The beasts beyond the veil were not isolated to Gathis. The rune priests now saw their presence in scattered readings across the Great Rift. As the warp grew wilder, these creatures, perhaps birthed by the rift itself, would multiply. The war ahead was no longer one of known enemies. It was a war against the unknown, against gods that had not yet taken names. The war of beasts and gods had begun, and the Vulca Fenrika, true to their nature, would hunt what no others dared. For that is what they are, the last hunters at the edge of the dying stars. The galaxy burned, and from that fire rose the Black Crusade of Shadows, the 13th Great March of Abaddon the Despoiler, War Master of Chaos. For centuries, Abaddon had gathered strength in the Eye of Terror. The failures of Horus had taught him patience, while others threw themselves against the Imperium's walls in fruitless rage. Abaddon watched, plotted, and built his war machine in the heart of the warp. His warbands multiplied, demon worlds swore fealty, ancient pacts were forged with the dark gods themselves, and with the tearing of the Great Rift, his hour had come. The Cicatrix Maledictum gave him what he had waited for, a galaxy divided, defenseless, drowning in anarchy. Now, as the eye bled into the void, the Black Legion launched its most devastating campaign since the days of Horus. This was no mere war. It was a slow suffocation, a creeping spread of darkness across entire sectors. But even amid the encroaching night, one howl answered. The Vulca Fenrika did not wait for the war to come to Fenris. They hunted. Logan Grimnar gathered the great companies once again. Ragnar Blackmane, Chrome Dragongaze, Harald Deathwolf, and Bjorn Stormwolf all answered the call. Reinforced by Primaris packs and shadowed by the Wolfen, the rout cast their fangs toward the heart of the Black Crusade itself. This would not be war as others waged it. They would not try to hold sectors nor wage protracted sieges. Instead, they would do as Russ had taught them, break the enemy's back by hunting its head. The wolves knew the truth of chaos. The heretic's strength was not his war hosts. It was his champions, his dark apostles, his sorcerers, his warlords. If the leaders fell, the warbands beneath them would tear themselves apart in pursuit of dominance. And so the wolves went for the throat. The Black Crusade of Shadows spread across multiple war fronts. The Cadian Gate shattered, the worlds beyond consumed by anarchy. Black Legion task forces surged into the Imperium Nihilus, carving bloody trails across abandoned sectors. Word-bearers, Night Lords, and Iron Warriors swarmed alongside them. Cult uprisings lit the hive cities of 100 worlds aflame. Yet where the enemy expected defense, they found hunters. On the world of Draken's Rest, a critical staging ground for Abaddon's eastern flank, Ragnar Blackmane led the assault personally. The Black Legion's warsmiths had fortified the world with warp-forged bunkers and demon-wrought engines. The planet's hives pulsed with sacrifice, feeding the warp breaches that sustained Abaddon's forward bases. The wolves fell from the void like spears of ice. Drop pods tore into the demon-racked skies, their engines howling like the wolves of Asaheim. Thunderhawk gunships swept the skies, disgorging packs of blood claws and intercessors onto the surface. Wolfen packs struck the summoning circles directly, slaughtering the cult sorcerers mid-ritual. Ragnar led his wolf guard in a decapitation strike aimed directly at the Black Legion warlord overseeing the ritual sites. The battle raged through the obsidian streets of Drakenhive, where warp-twisted mutants threw themselves against the advancing wolves. But nothing could halt Ragnar's charge. Frostfang, his mighty rune blade, cleaved through possessed champions and demonic horrors alike. Plasma bursts detonated around him as intercessor squads provided covering fire, blasting through traitor formations. When Ragnar finally reached the warlord's sanctum, he found not a man, but a monster. The Black Legion commander had fused himself with a warp-forged demon engine, his body swollen with unnatural power. Ragnar fought as only the young wolf could, with raw fury honed by discipline. He danced between the creature's hammer blows, slicing through exposed joints, severing warp flesh with precision. The final strike came as Ragnar leapt atop the beast, driving Frostfang deep into its corrupted heart. The demon's shriek split the air as it was banished back into the warp, taking the warlord's soul with it. With their commander slain, the Black Legion forces on Draken's Rest fractured. The surviving traitor bands turned on each other in desperate bids for dominance, while the wolves hunted the stragglers like predators among scattered prey. And this was but one world. Across the Crusade's reach, the wolves repeated their strategy. On Sikarum's spine, Crom Dragongaze led a high-orbit boarding assault directly into the flagship of a word-bearer's host fleet, cleaving through decks filled with chanting cultists and demonic entities until the Dark Apostle leading the fleet was beheaded before his corrupted altar. On Mordrak's Shroud, Harald Deathwolf and his Thunderwolf cavalry led a daring planetary raid to sever the warp spires that were stabilizing Abaddon's bridgehead into the Segmentum Pacificus. The spires collapsed under targeted melta charges, destabilizing the warp breaches and forcing the Black Legion fleet into chaotic retreat. On the void world of Alaric's Beacon, the Space Wolves engaged in their most desperate hunt of the campaign, confronting an elite warband of Night Lords led by the infamous Talon Master Vark, who had used terror tactics to collapse entire worlds into heresy. In the labyrinthine tunnels of Alaric's shattered moon bases, the wolves stalked their prey. The Night Lords, masters of ambush and fear, sought to turn the shadows against them, but the rout do not fear the dark. The rune priests wove protective wards that blinded the Night Lords' auspex and nullified their terror auras. Bjorn's Stormwolf's packs flushed them into kill zones with disciplined sweeps, while River squads counter-ambushed the ambushers in brutal close-quarter duels. In the final confrontation, Vark attempted to flee into the void aboard his personal strike cruiser, only for Bjorn to ram the warship directly with his own. Boarding torpedoes tore into the Night Lord's vessel. The final duel between Bjorn's champions and Vark's chosen unfolded amid the burning ruin of the ship's core. When Vark finally fell beneath Bjorn's frost axe, his helm split and his traitor blood steaming into the cold void, the Night Lord's fleet collapsed into disarray. The wolves left no stone unblooded. Yet even as they succeeded in these surgical strikes, the larger war raged on. The Black Crusade of Shadows was not so easily broken. Abaddon's strength was vast, his warbands innumerable. Every defeat at the wolves' hands was answered with fresh invasions elsewhere. And then, Abaddon himself moved. The despoiler unleashed his own trap, striking at the Segmentum's key warp routes, while the wolves were deep in the Nihilus, forcing them to scatter across broken supply lines. Even as great companies reaped great victories, Abaddon's forward waves bypassed their hunting grounds, driving toward Terra's throat once more. Logan Grimnar understood the danger. The rout had blooded the Black Crusade, but they had not ended it. They had stalled the bleeding, but not cauterized the wound. The Great Wolf issued new orders. The hunt would continue, but the rout would not be lured into fighting alone. They would link with the Indomitus Crusade where possible, coordinate strikes with the Custodies and the Grey Knights. For while the wolves were unmatched hunters, even the greatest predators could not face the entire tide alone. The Black Crusade of Shadows was not yet ended. Abaddon still marched, the Eye of Terror still bled, and the wolves, ever defiant, sharpened their blades once more. The wolf time pressed forward, and the hunt was far from over. For 10,000 years, the Fang has kept his throne empty. The Wolf King departed long ago, vanishing into the stars with words heavy in the hearts of his sons. I go where you cannot follow, but one day, in the time of ending, I shall return. The sagas have sung of that promise ever since. The rune priests have read the shifting stars, watched the currents of the warp, and whispered of signs. But none truly know where Leman Russ has gone, nor what he has faced in the black gulfs beyond the Imperium's reach. Yet stories remain, fragments, echoes carried across the void like the fading howl of a distant wolf. They call them the lost hunts of the Wolf King. It is said that Russ did not vanish into the warp like the heretic sorcerers who consort with demons. His path was not one of corruption, but of duty. He went to hunt a prey far greater than the traitor legions, a prey that even now remains cloaked in the deepest shadow. Some believe his journey began as a pursuit of the lost gods, the dark forces behind the ruinous powers themselves. Not the chaos gods alone, but ancient things older than humanity, whose names had been scratched out of reality long before Terra's first cities were born. Beings who exist behind the warp itself, whispering even to the dark gods as wolves whisper to their cubs. The oldest rune priests speak of the great beasts of chaos, entities not bound to Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, or Slaanesh, but existing apart, watching as gods fight over scraps, shadows that feed on the endless war itself, growing stronger with every soul lost to despair. Russ, it is said, saw the storm before any other. The Horus heresy was only the surface, a tool for deeper hungers. And so, when the galaxy burned, he went beyond it, into the eye, into the warp, into the forgotten corners where few could survive. The lost hunts began there. The first sighting comes from a wandering navigator vessel, the Pilgrim of Sindar, lost for centuries within the outer tides of the Eye of Terror. When the ship re-emerged, its surviving crew spoke of an impossible vision, a great wolf made of silver light, leading a host of warriors across a blackened world. They claimed the warriors bore the eyes of Russ and wielded ancient frost blades, yet fought things so alien they defied all recognition. The Ordo Malleus dismissed the report as warp hallucination. The rune priests of Fenris, however, took careful note. Centuries later, rogue traders near the Ghoul Stars reported finding entire moonships adrift in void currents, not mapped on any Imperial chart. Within, they discovered murals etched by unknown hands, depictions of armored giants locked in battle against titanic, many-headed creatures whose mouths devoured stars. Among the warriors stood a figure clad in wolf pelts, his face concealed but his posture unmistakable. The wolf saga inscribed there ended abruptly, the final battle unwritten. The trail grew colder with each passing century. The Imperium spiraled into endless wars. The Black Crusades grew ever more bold, and still the Wolf King did not return. His absence became a wound in the heart of the rout, one that never fully closed. Yet recently, as the Great Rift split the stars apart, new signs emerged. When the Cicatrix Maledictum opened, strange warp currents surged across known space. Pulses of energy that disrupted astropathic networks, destabilized warp lanes, and sent entire fleets spinning into uncharted voids. One such pulse washed across the Fenris sector itself. The rune priests gathered as the pulse struck, their minds burned by a single overwhelming vision. A frozen moon illuminated by blue lightning, surrounded by a great hunt of wolf spirits circling an ancient throne of black stone. And on that throne, a figure clad in ancient Mark II warplate, draped in the pelt of a great wolf whose fangs were long as blades, his golden eyes burned, rusky. But before the vision could stabilize, it was gone, consumed by the storm. Since that night, rune priests across Fenris have shared strange dreams. Some speak of hearing the Wolf King's voice calling from afar, whispering words in the old Fenrisian tongue. Others dream of distant hunts, of titanic beasts, battles against things far more alien than the demons of chaos, battles fought beyond reality's edge. The most radical among the rune priests propose that Russ has become something more than a Primarch, that his long hunt has altered him, not into a demon as befell his corrupted brothers, but into a being beyond the mortal coil, a guardian of the thin wall between reality and utter dissolution. Others warn of hubris in such thinking, but the evidence grows. In remote sectors of the Imperium Nihilus, a few great companies encountered what they can only call echoes, phenomena where enemy chaos warbands were found, slaughtered without explanation, their bodies torn as though by beasts wielding blades. No tracks, no signatures, only silence and the faint scent of Fenrisian ice lingering in the void. In one such instance, Bjorn Stormwolf's strike force discovered a Black Legion warband completely destroyed aboard a crippled warbarge adrift near the warp-dead system of Varrock's tomb. The only trace left behind was a crude, claw-carved symbol in the chamber wall. The ancient Fenrisian rune for the hunt continues. The Wolf Lords debated the meaning for weeks. Could the Wolf King already walk among the stars? Could his lost hunts still continue, invisible to the Imperium, yet striking from beyond the warp, disrupting the great enemy in ways no mortal fleet could follow? Or were these merely shadows, signs left by something else wearing his shape? The mystery endures, but one truth remains unshaken. The saga of Leman Russ is not yet finished. The rout still awaits the final howl. The great wolf's throne remains empty, his drinking horn untouched, his name carved into the highest stones of the Hall of Heroes, unfinished, incomplete. The Wolf Lords continue their oaths, the rune priests keep watch, the wolfen stir uneasily beneath the fang, and the stars themselves, broken and bleeding, still feel the weight of a hunter who may yet return for the final battle. The lost hunts are not myths to the rout. They are promises, and one day, perhaps on the eve of the galaxy's last breath, the Wolf King's howl will pierce the void once more, and his hunt shall end where it began, in blood and battle. The galaxy shudders beneath the weight of its own dying breath. The cicatrix maledictum pulses like a black artery through the stars, growing wider with each passing cycle. The great rift has sundered the old maps of the Imperium, turned loyal worlds into isolated fortresses, and rendered once navigable warp lanes into untrustworthy abysses. Everywhere, the enemies of mankind gather like wolves around a wounded prey. And yet, even as the Imperium staggers under the weight of its own crumbling empire, the rout endures. The Vulca Fenrica stand at the edge of this dying age, the final watch of Fenris. The final oaths were not sworn with banners or ceremonies, but beneath the pale moons of Asaheim, as the storm winds howled like the voices of the ancestors themselves. The Wolf Lords gathered once more in the shadow of the Fang, where the bones of 10,000 heroes sleep beneath runestone-marked vaults. Here, the sons of Russ laid down the truths that even the High Lords of Terra feared to speak. This was no longer merely war. This was the end of all sagas. The Imperium still fights. Guilliman's indomitous crusade carves swathes of salvation through the chaos-ravaged galaxy. But the battle grows desperate. Tyrannid tendrils slip past even the most vigilant patrols. The orcs rise in waves that engulf entire sectors in green fire. The Necrons awaken in patterns none can predict. The warp bleeds fresh horrors into real space each season. But where others crumble beneath the enormity of the task, the wolves only bare their fangs. They have prepared for this moment for 10,000 years. The Fang has become more than a fortress. It is a shrine to the endurance of mankind's wild soul. Its defenses have been layered across the centuries. The old macro turrets of the Great Crusade, reinforced by Mechanicus plasma arrays, Iron Priest-crafted void shields, strengthened by hybrid Fenrisian-engineered circuits, anti-warp wards laid into the very stone by rune priests who have sacrificed decades to inscribe protective runes into every wall. The defense of the Fang is no longer solely planetary. The orbital spheres that now circle Fenris bristle with lances and plasma batteries. Massive void pylons anchored into Fenris's crust serve both as planetary defense and warp stabilizers, keeping reality itself anchored as the storms lash closer to the heart of the sector. Even in the face of overwhelming odds, the great companies remain the spear points of the Imperium's farthest defenses. Harald Deathwolf hunts the encroaching Tyrannid tendrils near the Ghost Stars, his Thunderwolf cavalry striking with speed and precision, disrupting the High Fleet's feeding paths and starving the Synapse web. Ragnar Blackmane, ever the eager blade, leads strike forces deep into the Nearless still, launching counter-hunts against the Black Legion warbands that spread like a cancer from the Eye's edge, assassinating their warlords and splintering their control. Crom Dragongaze has taken the rout's fury to the orcs of the Cragmoor cluster, where his great company has waged a brutal war of attrition that leaves entire orc moons gutted and silent. Bjorn Stormwolf, the Fleet Master, maintains the ever-moving battle groups that roam through the contested warp corridors, ensuring the route remains mobile, that they can still strike, even as other Imperial fleets are paralyzed by the Rift's madness. And above all stands Logan Grimnar, the old wolf, still unbowed after centuries of war. His eyes burn not with age, but with purpose, for he knows the truth few others dare admit aloud. The wolf time is here. The signs have multiplied beyond counting. The omens the rune priests once read as distant prophecies are now unfolding realities. In the skies above Fenris, the twin moons have turned red more than once, their orbits shifting with the tides of the warp. The seas beneath Asaheim churn without wind, as if great beasts stir beneath the waves. The Kraken, oldest predators of Fenris, have grown larger and more aggressive, as if sensing the end of an age. The Wulfen are no longer an isolated few. Increasing numbers of recruits feel the pull of the beast within earlier and stronger, forcing the wolf priests and rune priests to adapt the ancient rites yet again. The Wulfen packs now fight openly alongside the great companies, not as cursed outcasts, but as revered warriors in the most savage battles. The Primaris wolves have fully integrated into the rout's bloodline. Their strength and discipline, once viewed with suspicion, have proven essential as the wars grow more desperate. But even within the Primaris stock, strange new expressions of the Canis Helix are emerging, mutations both feared and respected by their brethren. Yet, in all this, it is not the enemies at their gates that weigh heaviest upon the rout's hearts. It is the silence of Russia. Despite every sign that the wolf time has arrived, despite every whisper of returning gods and final battles, the Wolf King has not yet returned. The rune priests speak of his presence felt in the warp's currents, but never seen. The echoes of his hunt continue. Strange warp dead zones where chaos warbands are found gutted without explanation, cryptic Fenrisian runes carved into the walls of broken warships. But still, his final howl has not rung out across the stars. The Wolf Lords speak less of it now. Each senses the weight of their father's absence like a great stone upon the chest. But they do not falter, for their oaths are not to comfort or certainty. Their oaths are to endurance, and so the final watch holds. The Fang's great feasting halls still echo with laughter, even as the last battles draw near. The sagas of the fallen are sung louder than ever, so that the dead may carry their glory into the afterlife. The young are trained harder, the trials more brutal, for only the strongest may now carry the weight of the rout into the last age. The rune priests continue their nightly vigils beneath the Stormcaller's sanctum, casting the runes into frozen pools, watching the visions writhe and flicker. The Iron Priests toil deep beneath the mountain, activating machines older than the Imperium itself, stockpiling munitions, awakening long-slumbering defense engines whose names are known only to the oldest lore keepers. The Wulfen howl nightly, their songs merging with the winds of Fenris, as though calling to their lost father across the rift. And beyond the stars, the enemies of mankind sharpen their blades for the final reckoning. The Eye of Terror swells with fresh warp surges. Abaddon's Black Legion forges new alliances with heretical warbands. Tyrannid hive fleets accelerate their consumption. Orcs gather in such numbers that even ancient Terra fears their next wah. And yet the rout watches still. They are the shield at the end of all things. The Fang stands. The Wolf King's seat remains empty, but the Vilka Fenrika are ready. Whether Russ returns or not, whether the end comes in years or millennia, they will face it as they always have, with fangs bared, axes raised, and the unbreakable oath of the hunt burning in their hearts. The final watch endures. The wolf time howls, and the saga is not yet finished. The galaxy trembles on the edge of its final night. The stars, once cold sentinels of the void, flicker uncertainly as ancient oaths fray beneath the weight of unending war. The cicatrix maledictum stretches wider than ever before, its tendrils clawing across the heavens like a wound that will not close. In the Imperium Nihilus, light itself feels like a memory. But amid that dying storm, the rout still hunts. The Vilka Fenrika, battered, blooded, unbroken. The sagas speak of many battles, but there will come a final battle, one that has not yet been sung, but which every wolf knows is inevitable. It is not marked upon star charts or decreed by the High Lords of Terra, for this battle is older than any bureaucrat's tally. It is the battle at the end of all things, when the galaxy's last breath becomes a scream. The Wolf King promised it long ago. The rune priests call it the last hunt. The wolfen feel it in their bones. The wolf lords speak of it around the great fires in the Fang, but never in fear, only with quiet resolve. And so it begins. The final convulsions of the Eye of Terror erupt in a storm that tears through entire sectors. Entire demon worlds are flung into real space like broken stones hurled by a god's wrath. Abaddon's Black Legion surges forth at the head of this flood, their banners crowned in unholy fire. Behind them comes the massed horde, world eaters in berserk madness, word bearers singing blasphemies to their dark patrons, night lords bleeding the stars dry, iron warriors dragging their war machines across entire continents. And further still, the ancient Xenos empires rise in answer. The Tyranids surge forward, driven by a will that none can fathom, their high fleets converging like predatory serpents, seeking the galaxy's heart. The orcs erupt into the greatest Wah the species has ever mustered, their green tide crashing into all in their path. Even the Necrons stir, their silent tombs awakening across long-forgotten star systems. The galaxy chokes in war. Every world becomes a fortress, every system becomes a battlefield, and yet, through all of it, the Fang remains. Fenris, that ancient death world of ice and fire, stands defiant, its twin moons glowing like cold eyes beneath the aurora-draped sky. Upon its surface, the Vulca Fenrica gather. The final watch becomes the last stand. Logan Grimnar, the old wolf, stands at the stone table one final time, addressing his gathered wolf lords beneath the towering statue of Leman Russ. Our saga was never meant to end in comfort. We were not made to fade away like old men around cold fires. We were made for this. Around him, the leaders of each great company nod in grim unity. Their fangs glint beneath braided beards. Their eyes burn with the golden light of the Canis Helix. There is no hesitation. They have seen the approaching storm. The great claws of the Black Crusade have reached toward Fenris before. But now, for the first time, they come in full. The eye itself seems to bleed directly into Fenrisian space. Warp tides crash upon the edges of real space, warping the stars as Abaddon's final fleet, larger than any since Horus himself, closes upon the world of Russ. The Black Legion is not alone. The Thousand Suns follow, their rubric automatons marching beneath the Diamond King Magnus, returning once again to destroy that which denied him so long ago. Daemons howl in the warp currents, lords of change casting their sightless gazes toward Asaheim. And yet, the wolves stand. The Fang's defenses blaze to life, macro cannons older than the Imperium itself, roaring into the void. Void shields humming with layered wards, empowered by generations of rune priests who prepared for this moment. Bjorn Stormwolf commands the fleets above, maneuvering his remaining ships into impossible orbits, striking at weak points in the traitor fleets, denying the enemy a clean path to the world below. Harold Deathwolf rides at the head of his Thunderwolf cavalry across the frozen plains, his warriors scattering the early landing forces that slip through the burning atmosphere. Ragnar Blackmane leads brutal strike raids into boarding actions against descending traitor vessels, slaughtering boarding parties before they breach the Fang's inner sanctums. Even the Wolfen are fully unleashed, their howls echoing like ancient spirits as they rend demonic war engines limb from limb. But the enemy is unending. The first landings break through. Chaos Titans stride across the ice fields. Demon Primarch Magnus descends once more toward the Fang's gates, his sorcerous might warping the very ground beneath him. The Eye of Terror itself pulses as fresh rifts tear through reality, vomiting forth entire legions of demons. The rune priests fight desperately to hold the fabric of real space together. Their runes blaze across the Fang's walls, their chants rising in defiant fury as warp currents swirl around them. The battle spills into the Fang itself. The halls of heroes run with blood. Statues of fallen wolf lords are shattered beneath the claws of greater demons. Even the sacred gene vaults of Russ face breach after breach. And still the rout fights on. Every corridor becomes a battlefield. Every chamber echoes with war cries. The wolves fight not as disciplined legions, but as packs, coordinated by instinct, brothers covering brothers in the ways only the Vulka Fenrika can. And then, at the moment when the darkness seems all-consuming, the howl comes. It begins low. A sound not from within the Fang, nor from the skies above, but from the very fabric of the warp itself. A howl so ancient, so primal, that every wolf of Fenris feels it in their marrow. The howl of the Wolf King, the warp tears like paper. From beyond the eye, a great hunt emerges. Leman Russ has returned. His arrival is not a mere reappearance. It is a hunt long in the making. With him come figures barely glimpsed, ancient warriors clad in armor unlike any seen in the Imperium, perhaps the surviving Wolfblade who vanished with him into the long darkness. They charge forth alongside him, striking into the rear of Abaddon's vast war host, sowing chaos amidst the chaos. The Black Legion falters. The demon hosts reel. Magnus, sensing his brother's arrival, turns his gaze toward the heavens, and for the third time in their endless saga, the Wolf King and Crimson King meet upon the battlefield. Their duel echoes across reality itself. Russ fights not as the Leman Russ of old, but as something more. A being who has walked where no mortal could follow, whose claws are sharpened by endless battles against nightmares beyond comprehension. His blade sings with the power of his long hunt. As brother battles brother once more, the rout rallies. With the Wolf King returned, the final watch becomes the final charge. The Vulka Fenrika hurl themselves into the heart of the enemy lines, howling, unchained, unstoppable. They do not fight for victory. They fight to fulfill their oath. To end their saga as Russ would have wanted, with fang and fury, beneath the burning sky. The outcome of this battle, whether the Imperium survives, whether the galaxy falls, remains unwritten. But the saga of the Vulka Fenrika is eternal. Their howl will echo forever, through every age, through every star, until the final wolf howls its last.